Boy gets a level-up system from God and gains godlike powers. If you dig my recaps, don't forget to subscribe and smash that notification bell. The anime begins 3 years earlier than the current day, where the army is attacking an island, but the fighters realize that their weapons are ineffective against the forces they are facing. Therefore, they must leave it to the hunters because it is the only alternative. Inside the island, a troop of hunters forms up to deal with an approaching swarm of ants. At the moment the insects attack, the regiment captain encourages his troops to hold off the enemies as much as possible, or else the vanguard will be vulnerable. Despite their efforts, the hunter's rank was too low, and they ended up becoming easy prey for the giant insects. The captain is eaten alive while feeling his life fading before his eyes until another hunter eliminates the ant with his club and heals the fighter. However, another group of ants attacks the healer, but another member of the hunter team appears and, seeing Byung in danger, electrocutes the enemies from a distance. The last member of the team, Yunho, uses his devastating physical strength to secure the front line, while the healer finishes his work with the wounded in the field. Impressed by all that talent, the defeated squadron watches as the S-rank hunters resolve the situation. Unsuk, the member with electric claws, asks his healer not to rush ahead, but Byung just wanted to help as many people as he could. Besides, he was sure his two friends would come to protect him. At that moment, a gigantic ant appears on the battlefield, but despite its size and intimidating appearance, the S-rank team advances against the opponent. While Yunho holds the ant by its jaws, Unsuk injures it with his electricity. Then Yunho tears off the insect's jaws with his own hands and hurls one of the ant's claws at it with absurd force, piercing the giant's body. But several other identical ants appear, and Yunho activates an ability that makes him even more powerful, while Unsuk unleashes tremendous lightning on the battlefield. The amount of power is so great that it can be seen from the other side of the island, where the commander of another troop realizes that the S-rank has arrived in time. Nevertheless, Master Choi had his own battle to win, and when the enemy horde approaches, the leader burns all the weaker ants and orders his troops to advance against the rest of them. In the meantime, the context of the situation is explained. Over 10 years ago, a series of portals appeared connecting our world to an alternate dimension. The other side of each portal was filled with bizarre creatures called magic monsters. Those who awaken abilities to face these monsters, which are immune to conventional weapons, are called hunters. Based on their natural power, they are classified in descending order as S, A, B, C, D, or E rank. However, once this power awakens, it cannot be increased through any individual effort. 3 years later, a portal has a whole structure to serve the purposes of the hunters, while a group of lower-class hunters gathers around to pass the time and prepare for excursions into dungeons. At this moment, a food truck attendant gives coffee to one of them and wishes him good luck on the raid. One of his friends, Park, arrives at this moment and greets Kim. Kim is surprised by his friend's arrival since he had said he was tired of hunting, but the man responds that his wife is pregnant with their second child, so he needs to earn money from raids because diapers aren't free. And at that moment, the protagonist arrives and all the hunters are messing with the guy, greeting him or making some joke. Since he drew attention upon arrival, Park asks if the guy is so strong that everyone wants to talk to him. However, Kim claims it's the opposite. As the boy is known as the weakest hunter of humanity, people kind of adopted him as a mascot, so he is well known. Once he ended up in the hospital after participating in an E-rank mission. At least when he is called, everyone already knows that the raid will be easy. And as Sum approaches, the two hunters try to lower their voices so the guy doesn't hear, but he had already heard everything, resigned to not being able to argue against facts. Right in front of him, his friend Joki shows concern for Junwoo Sung being hurt once again and insists on knowing the origin of the wound, even though the guy avoids talking about it. Then he comments on the case known among the hunters, the famous E-rank portal raid, where Jinwoo was the only one injured and went straight to the hospital. Since all the other hunters were of higher rank, no one saw the need to bring a healer, so it fell to the young man who ended up lagging behind. Mitsuki argues that they were selfish and didn't think about the group's needs, but Jinwoo takes responsibility, saying it's his fault for being weak, and that he's already used to being treated that way. The raid is about to begin, and one of the hunters volunteers to be the group leader. Since everyone around recognizes that Song Cheol is the most skilled of all, there was no objection. Soon, the team enters the portal, and before Sung enters, Kim asks him to stay behind the rest of the group and be careful not to get hurt. Joey tries to motivate the boy and also enters, while he stays behind and observes his knife with almost no magical power, which was the only thing he managed to buy. Still, it's better than nothing, so Junwoo Sung promises to do his best this time. Far away, the president of the Hunter Association, Go Gunny, talks to his assistant, reporting that the conversation with the government was the same as always. They accuse dungeon breaks of being a problem, but still want the resources that hunters collect from them. Go doesn't mind them wanting a piece of the pie, but he wishes there wasn't so much hypocrisy in it. After all, dungeons are the livelihood of hunters. They live off what they sell from these dungeons, and the most valuable example of this is the stones collected from defeated monsters, essence stones. And finally, Jinwoo achieved his first victory after putting in a lot of effort for it. Despite that, another creature emerged, attacking him. No matter how hard he tried to confront it, when attempting to thrust his knife into the enemy, his weapon was completely shattered. In return, the monster drove a sword into the boy's abdomen. Park arrived at that moment and eliminated the enemy, but he soon had to return to the front lines and Sung was bleeding heavily. So Juri took charge of healing her friend. While receiving treatment, Sung observed the fight of his companions. His vision grew blurrier as he wished he could be there in the battle. Returning to the president, he explained that the most expensive essence stones are collected from the strongest monsters. These stones can be transformed into powerful weapons and equipment to fight against other monsters. In addition to these stones, mana crystals serve the same purpose but are less potent. The assistant then asked if the government had another intention in using these items. Go explained that their intention was to use the materials as a source of energy, as it is a cheaper and more efficient form of energy than current ones, and it also pollutes the environment less. This is why there is so much pressure on the hunters. The cleanest and most effective energy source comes only from resources extracted from dungeons. In Sung's mission, the team finally defeated the dungeon boss. Seeing everyone celebrating the victory, Joey asked her friend if he continues trying to be a hunter out of stubbornness. After all, if he continues like this, something more serious could happen at any moment. Today, for example, the injury was not just in the abdomen, but throughout the body. Sung apologized for the trouble, but Joey scolded him, saying she doesn't want apologies, she's just worried about him. Meanwhile, other hunters were collecting loot, but this dungeon didn't have many mana crystals. Everyone was worried about the payment they would receive from selling the items. Sung at least only had the rank E essence stone that he obtained almost at the cost of his life. During this time, the hunter discovered a tunnel inside the dungeon, indicating it was a double dungeon, a new opportunity to get quality loot. However, the squad leader was cautious and informed his subordinates that in extraordinary cases like this, the standard procedure is to await orders from the Hunter Association. Other members questioned this stance, fearing they would send other hunters who would take the remaining loot. Besides, the tunnel was still part of this rank D dungeon, so there shouldn't be a problem. Song Cheadle decided to take a vote on whether to enter the tunnel or not. It ended in a tie 6-6. However, Sung hadn't voted yet, so he was responsible for the tiebreaker. He considered that a D-rank dungeon was too dangerous for him, but since his father was missing, he was the sole provider for his family. So he had no choice. He needed to pay for his mother's treatment and his sister's college. After his reflection, he chose to dive in. In the moment when the weakest hunter seeks his breakthrough, Hunter Association is recruiting new members. Candidates line up to test their abilities, and an examiner evaluates each one's rank with a black sphere that citizens touch for scanning. A representative passes the results to Master Choi, informing him that a B rank and 2 C ranks join the guild. The chief emphasizes that gender and age don't matter. If the person has talent, they must receive a contract offer, even if they're not a Chaha. Meanwhile, in the most Brazilian street in the Anaheim, 2 guys on a motorcycle snatch a purse from a girl and speed away with the victim's belongings. Along the way, a woman in a pink cap stands in the middle of the street, making the thugs nervous. They continue accelerating and the woman jumps over them, surgically retrieving the purse. In the process, the motorcycle skids, and the woman returns the bag to the victim. The entire population witnesses this act of heroism and approaches Hunter Chaha, a renowned S-rank associate, for a photo. Before being photographed, she expresses annoyance at all the attention and leaves for some peace. Back in the dungeon, 40 minutes have passed since they entered the tunnel. Since the portal stays open for an hour after defeating the boss, they still have 20 minutes to get what they need and leave. Jinwoo Sung takes the opportunity to apologize again for putting them in this new predicament, as Joey voted against the new expedition. However, she gets irritated and reminds him that he would be dead if the sword strike had been a bit higher, so he should be more careful before entering places even more dangerous than those that nearly took his life for good. Jinwoo reflects on the scolding and acknowledges that having a B-rank healer by his side is a significant advantage. The girl asks to be rewarded with a dinner, and Jinwoo's reaction makes it seem like he'd prefer another sword in the stomach. Further ahead, the group reaches the boss's chamber. Even though the colossal gate looks intimidating, no one wants to leave empty-handed, so they decide to enter anyway, considering they've come this far. Before that, the president of the Hunter Association introduces himself to the newly awakened and warns that no one is obliged to become a hunter, but once they make that choice, they must remain vigilant at all times, no matter how powerful they may be. As a final piece of advice, he asks all candidates to fear because fear keeps the courageous alive. Thus, the expedition group enters the boss's room and finds several ancient statues. Among them, one holds inscriptions about the commandments of the Temple of Kartanan. The leader of the hunters steps forward and begins to read. First, worship God. Second, praise God. Third, prove your faith in God. As the leader recites each commandment, Joey notices that the largest statue moved its eyes and calls Jinwoo to look, but the protagonist believes it's just in her imagination. Finally, Song Cheol reads the last commandment, stating that those who do not follow these words will not leave alive. With that, the gate closes and everyone is in shock. A hunter revolts at being put in that situation and leaves the group attempting to escape. However, one of the statues comes to life and ends the man with its axe before he can try to open the gate. As she annihilated a D-rank hunter as if it were nothing, it makes no sense to have a monster of that level in this lower level dungeon. Regardless, there's no way out, so Sung begins to imagine what will become of him. And it was at that moment that the largest statue in the room turns its eyes toward the protagonist. Despite this, Junwoo Sung recalls that he has been close to death many times before. In the first instance, he separated from the group on a raid and ended up trapped. Next, he was attacked by E-rank monsters and spent weeks in the hospital. Furthermore, he almost died of hunger in a labyrinth. No matter how low the dungeon rank was for him, it was always a matter of life or death. Unlike more skilled hunters who can defeat strong monsters and obtain rare items, all he had was a useless knife, and since it broke, he'll have to fight empty-handed. For reasons like these, some learn that he should observe and wait for a good opportunity, as he is not capable of charging into a raid head-on. And it was this realization that kept him alive until today, even through hardships. Soon, he shouts for the entire group to duck, while the statue spews lava from its eyes, sweeping through a significant portion of the hunters. Looking around, everyone present is overcome by panic and helplessness as chaos unfolds in the eyes of each hunter trapped in that chamber, and Jinwoo Sung has no doubt that you won't leave there alive. All around, the hunters tried to seize the brief respite to plan some kind of countermove, but everything seemed too small in the face of the enormity of the enemy. In the meantime, Jinwoo Sung attempted to assist the unconscious Joey, incapacitated by the attack. Song Cheol expressed gratitude to the young boy for his insight, acknowledging that he had anticipated the attack, instructing everyone to take cover, thus saving some lives. Jinwoo observed their leader and noticed his arm had been torn off. The experienced leader bravely tried to keep the young man calm, reassuring him that clenching his teeth would make the pain bearable. However, they needed to stop the bleeding before things took a turn for the worse, so Jinwoo did his part and covered the wound with gauze. During this act, Cheol mentioned he would have asked for treatment for Jogi, but she didn't handle pressure well and usually participated only in easy raids despite being a B-rank healer. He shared that he had been in 2 B-rank raids himself and had no doubt that this enemy belonged to Class A, maybe even S. As for the temple commandments written on that plaque, they likely referred to a deity represented by the statue. Along with the portals, various supernatural phenomena began occurring in the world. Some of these phenomena affected the hunters, while monsters behind these portals accumulated unimaginable powers. Meanwhile, far away at a school, the protagonist's sister, Jana Sung, talked with a friend. The short-haired girl asked if Jana's brother was indeed a hunter. She confirmed it, mentioning he was an E-rank and usually came home bandaged from his missions. When asked about the interest, the girl evaded the question, whispering that she could surely do a better job than that E-rank hunter. Back in the dungeon, the leader argued that the enemy was too powerful to be destroyed, so they needed to stay calm, assess the situation, and find a safe way out. Despite the precaution, a team member rushed and refused to die there, having just signed a contract with a major guild. Trusting his speed, he assured he could cross the gate before being caught. However, before reaching halfway, the statue almost completely destroyed the speedster's body, leaving only his feet behind. Undoubtedly, this was the last evidence they needed to understand that this creature could annihilate them in the blink of an eye. The big question was why it hadn't eliminated them all yet, and perhaps the reason was a hint of an exit. Therefore, Jinwoo Sung used his wits and asked his leader to recall the first commandment of Kartanan, venerate God. Interpreting the phrase, Jinwoo Sung stood up in search of a solution. Despite Cheol's concern about the young man's unexpected reaction, something in his eyes indicated that he hadn't given up on life. Analyzing the commandment, the young man asked the rest of the group to bow before the statue, simulating the veneration that the god demanded. The hunters were confused and skeptical about the effectiveness of this measure, but with no better ideas at the moment, they all joined the plan. The veneration caused a movement in the statue, changing its face to a sinister expression. After a few tense seconds, the group began to question the next step. Park felt confident enough to stand up, believing the statue had stopped attacking. Following suit, the others stood up. But the tension was far from over because the giant statue then rose from its throne with that sinister expression and began to chase the guild. Although Song Shiel was the leader, the group pressured Jin Woo-sung to come up with the next step. Obviously, the answer would be in the second commandment, but the intense pressure on the young man prevented him from finding a way out. That's when a scholar of ethnology, the in-depth study of societies and their culture, took responsibility. This reading reminded the hunter of some exaltations to the gods. Applying his knowledge to the statue, he knelt down and offered a kind of prayer. While the ethnologist prayed, the statue lifted its foot higher and higher until it stepped on him as if he were an insect. This triggered chaos and everyone began to run in pure desperation. Panic robbed a hunter of her reaction, and she too was mercilessly trampled. As he ran, Park remembered his family waiting at home with his second child about to be born. He tried to find a safer spot, but turning his back to another statue, it used its sword to cut Park in half. Meanwhile, Jinwoo was thinking of any possible clue to praise that cursed demon. So he observed his surroundings again and seeing the statues around him, noted that the first one held a spear, the second an axe, the next a hammer, followed by a sword, and then a trumpet. Intuitively, he predicted that the statues with musical instruments were peaceful. He instructed each member to run to one. But as he reached a statue with a drum, the instrument's music didn't play. Supposing that it would only work if only one person stayed with each statue, he left Jody in safety and moved on to the next. As the only target in the field, the god went after Sung, who sprinted to the last alternative. At the moment he would be crushed, he managed to jump and reach the statue he wanted. However, it was dark and he didn't see that the statue actually held a shield, not a musical instrument. It raised the weapon and struck the young hunter. Despite the brutal force of the impact, Jin Woo-sung survived and crawled towards the last instrument. Severely injured, he reached his destination just as the god stepped near his body. Nevertheless, the statue released its angelic voice, and with the praise of all the instruments playing together, the demon god sat back down. Joey chases after his friend, who is severely weakened. As if that's not enough, the statue's final stomp ends up taking the hunter's right leg. Jovi rushes to stop the bleeding, while she herself begins to bleed from all the openings on her face due to the difficulty of the wound. After the definitive end of the conflict, guild members exchange glances and assess the losses. Soon, they seek to find someone to blame for the tragedy that followed the vote to enter the tunnel. After all fingers are pointed, Song Cheol takes responsibility since he is the leader and in charge of the final word. Despite the heated discussion, the god raises his hand and the ground trembles, making the group think it's an earthquake. However, Jinwoo explains to the group that the statue was raising an altar in the center of the hall. As in many myths and cultures, gods demand sacrifices and offerings in their name. Following the third commandment, the next step is to prove your faith in God. In these moments, men need to distinguish themselves from boys, and Kim takes the first move, pointing his sword at Cheol, as he should bear the dishonor of failing in his leadership. Other members try to stop the action, but the leader himself surrenders to the sacrifice and goes to the altar. Their flames ignite around the ritual, but as nothing else happens, Jin Woo-sung asks for help to examine the altar closely. He spends some seconds trying to discern the next step, but with little success. Finally, he considers the possibility of someone coming to rescue them if they continue to wait. However, as the portal has been open for 7 days, the group fears that the statues may start moving again at any moment. After all, it takes a week for the portal to open completely. This process is called a dungeon break, and when it happens, monsters can cross over. In their case, if they fail, the demon god can enter the real world. Unaware of the ongoing events, Gina Sung visits her mother, undergoing painful treatment. Even with her unconscious, Gina updates her on recent matters, discusses her friends, and talks about the national exam results. Then, Jin Woo-sung calls the other members into the altar's circle, anticipating that they will need one person for each flame. Once done, blue fire surrounds the circle and the gate opens. However, the statues in the hall emit a strange glow and move toward the center, leaving the group uncertain about the next move. At this point, Jinwoo discovers that the statues stop moving when you keep your eyes on them. Therefore, everyone must keep their eyes on the enemies until they figure out an escape. However, one hunter panics and decides to run for her life, leaving everything behind. As she crosses the altar line, one of the flames extinguishes and the gate closes a bit. This opens the group's eyes to the intention of the third commandment, to test faith in God with an extreme situation like this. Regardless, this assumption doesn't confirm if they are facing a trap or not. Next, another member tries his luck and crosses the gate, repeating the process of extinguishing another flame and closing the gate a bit more. As he was the last support for the legless comrade, the protagonist falls to the ground. After this escape, Jin Woo-sung tells everyone not to leave because if they do, they will have a blind spot and won't be able to prevent the arrival of enemies. He assumes that the blue flames mark the time, so they can leave once they go out. Kim praises the boy's intelligence, especially since he has been labeled as useless since joining the association. However, Kim has a family waiting for him, so he doesn't want to die now. Therefore, Kim apologizes and flees the chamber. The three survivors now have a blind spot since they don't have enough eyes to cover all statue surroundings. In other words, they can no longer prevent the statues from approaching. Jinwoo starts to cry for coming so far and failing, despite surviving many challenges that tested him. But before the end, Song Cheol tells the two young ones to leave. According to him, it's evident that the gate will close after the penultimate survivor leaves. Since the two still have a long life ahead, they should go. He asks Jody to take care of Sung, and as the healer prepares to take her companion away, her legs lock and she can't move them. The leader thinks she exerted herself too much to heal Sung, but some action needed to be taken as the siege was about to close in. For this reason, Jinwoo Sung tells Cheol to carry the healer outside. The leader starts to argue, but the protagonist insists loudly that he should take her immediately because there is no other alternative, considering he is without a leg. Jo panics and tries to convince her friend to change his mind, but his response is to give his magic stone to the girl, considering she had invited him to lunch earlier. With this, she can earn some money and buy a special lunch when Jinwoo returns. He promises to get the change from her. Even so, Jui continues to protest, but with no more time to spare, Song Cheol knocks out the young girl and carries her outside. And as soon as the two leave, Jinwoo Sung is alone with all those statues around him, without his leg to run, just waiting for his end, sitting and defenseless. Despite everything, he feels it should have been like this from the beginning. After all, he has always been the weakest hunter. If he knew it would be like this, he would have definitely taken out a higher life insurance policy. Finally, he raises the sword left by Kim and intends to take at least one enemy with him. At that moment, a statue throws its giant sword at the boy, but it sticks into the altar near him. Another statue hits the ground, causing Jinwoo to roll with the impact, leaving him completely exposed to the enormous enemies. With that, the next blow is accurate, tearing off one of the hunter's arms. Praying for his end, the boy remained on the ground with no reaction, just lamenting not having another chance to do things differently. Meanwhile, another statue crushed his body with its hammer, breaking his bones. At that moment, despite the pain, Jinwoo Sung is proud of having at least reached this point. As he tries to stand again, a colossal statue pierces his right shoulder completely, impaling the boy on the wall. Miraculously alive, he spends his final moments harboring hatred for hunters like Kim, despising the fact that he said he couldn't take it anymore and had to leave. After all, it's logical that nobody could endure being there anymore. He was just justifying his own selfishness. It's always the most selfish ones who benefit the most. Jinwoo has a terminally ill mother, but even so, he decided to sacrifice himself for the group, leaving her and his sister alone, only to end up being massacred in the most painful and lonely way possible. Next, the sword-piercing Jinwoo is lifted high, causing extreme pain to the hunter, who is then thrown from a height of 20 meters and falls backward onto the sacrificial altar. His blood flows rapidly from his body as he cries and changes his mind. Now he feels that he doesn't want to die anymore, but it's too late. One of the statues then delivers the coup de grace to the protagonist, extinguishing the last blue flame. Following this, a screen opens with a notification about a secret mission called Courage of the Weak. This notification alerts someone that they have acquired the necessary qualifications to be a player, and then asks if they accept. Once the proposal is confirmed, another screen opens, warning that this person's heart will stop in 0.02 seconds if they don't accept, and then other options between yes and no are presented on the screen. In the end, the player goes ahead and accepts again. Suddenly, Jinwoo Sung wakes up in a hospital bed. Desperate, he looks over his entire body, recalling the limbs that were crushed by the giant statues. However, his body was intact with all his arms and legs, and there was no sign of the chest puncture. At this moment, two men enter the room, and one of them introduces himself as Woo Jinchul, the administrator of the surveillance team of the Hunter Association. Beside him is an assistant named Kang Tashik. First and foremost, Jinwoo Sung wants to know what surveillance wants with him. Woo informs him that the boy was unconscious for 3 days. As for his mission companions, Song Cheol lost an arm and probably won't be able to work as a hunter anymore. Lee Jo-hee, on the other hand, is traumatized and receiving psychiatric treatment. Due to her condition, the administrator is unsure if she will continue in the profession. Considering that only 6 hunters survived this dungeon, and everyone knows it's a very dangerous job. Despite the tragic outcomes, Woo mentions that such incidents are rare. Now regarding why they are there, when the White Tiger Guild arrived at the location after being informed by the survivors, they only found Jinwoo Sung lying on the ground, with no trace of the statues or the temple described by the survivors. However, since there was no inconsistency in the report and the remains of the deceased were at the scene, Jinwoo's group was removed from the list of suspects. By the way, the administrator asks if the boy had his second awakening. The awakening determines a hunter's power and it's supposed to be unchangeable. However, in rare cases, a hunter can undergo a second awakening. This bypasses the rule of immutable power and can elevate a hunter to rank A or even S. To measure the protagonist's new strength, a manometer is brought to him. Since he survived instant death level monsters, it's highly likely they are facing a new prodigy. After Jinwoo places his hand on the device, the screen displays the number 10. He was excited to discover his new rank and insists that the surveillance team reveal the result quickly. However, Woo Jinchul informs him that he misunderstood and apologizes to the young man. Outside, Kang Tashik seems frustrated with the test result. Even E-rank hunters can reach up to 70 points on the meter, so it's as if Jinwoo Sung is just a civilian based on his score. While Kang expresses his dissatisfaction, Woo Jinchul thinks that the dungeon has disappeared, and there's no way to explore it again to figure out how that boy survived. Back to the young man, he laments not getting a good score as he was hoping to level up. But above all, Jinwoo is confused that no one asked about the strange interface that looks like a video game, indicating that he had an unread message. This makes him think that only he can see this thing. He tries to touch the interface, but realizes it's not a touchscreen. The more he concentrates on it, the more some memories come back to him, like when he was about to die and this same screen appeared, saying he met the conditions to be a player and asking if he wanted to enter a mission called Courage of the Weak. Next, his sister appears in the hospital scolding him for not taking care of himself again. Almost every mission he comes back unharmed, but he remains a punching bag. However, as it was a genuine concern, Jinwoo smiles slightly at Gina's scolding. This leads her to think she's being sarcastic, so she threatens to quit studying and get a job if he continues to get injured, as one day, he'll end up crippled and unemployed. Acknowledging his sister's point, Jinwoo agrees to take it easy and then asks if Gina can see the strange interface in front of him. She thinks a doctor needs to examine his head but plays along. As a gamer, Jinwoo explains that this interface looks like a virtual game, asking what to do when an unread message notification appears in a game. Gina explains that normally you just open the message box. As the boy repeats his sister's words, the voice command shows the messages. The first one informs him that he has become a player, and the other says that the daily mission called Strength Training has arrived. Jinwoo tries to remember where he heard the word player, while Gina sees that her brother is fine and says goodbye. Outside, she meets her friend Song again, who believes she is more useful than Jinwoo as a hunter. Meanwhile, the boy delves deeper into the virtual menu, discovering that it is designed to assist in the player's development and not fulfilling the system's determination can result in a penalty. Finally, a third screen indicates that the rewards have already been delivered to him. He still doesn't understand what's going on, so he goes into the details of the strength training mission to take a look. The daily goal was to perform 100 push-ups, 100 squats, 100 sit-ups, and run 10 kilometers. If the player doesn't complete this mission, they will suffer a penalty. Jinwoo Sung thinks it's just a joke and tries to figure out how he could possibly do all that in his current state. But while lying down and not taking it seriously, a countdown in the menu is running out. In the meantime, the surveillance team administrator informs President Go that the young hunter, Jinwoo Sung, did not have a second awakening. Over the phone, Go is relieved that at least this case didn't cause a dungeon break, but there's still something fishy about this story. Therefore, the boss instructs surveillance to leave this dungeon in the database for further evaluation. Meanwhile, Master Choi invites Cha-ha to be instructor for the upcoming B-rank raid because it will be an important expedition to select new recruits for the institution. However, Cha-ha doesn't feel very confident in her mentoring skills, so Choi explains that all she needs to do is fight normally as she always does, and her performance will serve as an example for the less experienced. After that, he explains that the Hunter Guild is one of the country's top 5 guilds, but on an international level, they are still small. And although individual levels cannot be evolved, collective training will always be a differentiator, especially now that they are preparing for a very special moment. Later, a portal opens in the middle of a road and civilians wonder when the hunters will arrive to solve this problem. Meanwhile, Jinwoo, who is in the middle of his sleep, receives a mission failure message, and as a penalty, an earthquake shakes his room and the boy is teleported to an unknown place. Without understanding what happened, he encounters a giant desert centipede, while the panel reappears, stating that it's a punitive survival mission and the goal is to stay alive for 4 hours. Meanwhile, nurses realize that one of the patients is missing, and even after 2 hours of him fleeing from a monstrous insect, the staff is clueless and doesn't know where to look for Jinwoo. Thus, the boy remains trapped in that alternate world until the countdown ends, and just as the creature is about to strike, time runs out and the desperate boy returns directly to the hospital, receiving the news that he completed the mission and a reward has been granted to him. However, before he can retrieve the item, nurses enter his room and start assisting him. The next day, Jaina is on the phone with her brother and asks him to cover for her at Cheadle, since Jinwoo has caused her so much trouble again. In the meantime, Joey is summoned for a ranked D raid, and despite the association knowing that she's going through a tough time, the rest of the guild is busy, so she's the only option at the moment. Despite this, Joey declines the proposal, but at least learns that Jinwoo has significantly improved his condition. Happy with the news, she goes straight to visit her friend, but instead of continuing to rest, he is running around the hospital courtyard like crazy. Nurses comment that hunters recover faster than normal people, but what this boy is doing is unbelievable. Finally taking his daily missions seriously, Jinwoo's son discovers that each time he completes them, he receives 3 rewards. The first is total recovery, where all his exhaustion disappears. Second, some points to distribute among his attributes, and as always, he pays more attention to strength. In addition, there's even a skills and inventory screen, making his life really look like a game. And at this moment, as he reflects on his new path and navigates his imaginary menu, all the patients look at him as if the boy is from another world. Finally, the third reward is a random loot box. In this case, the item is a strange key. Until now, he had only obtained useless things like bandages or pens, so it seems that luck has finally arrived. According to the item description, Jinwoo Sung could use this key to teleport to an instance dungeon. The way to use this item is by reaching exit 3 of the Hapjeong subway station. However, Jinwoo has no idea what an instance dungeon is, but it seems like some mission for him to evolve his strength, or at least he hopes so. And during these reflections, the image of that giant macabre statue invades the protagonist's mind, causing physical pain as well. In the meantime, local newspapers report that several Rank D portals have opened around the country, and Rank C portals in the Upper and Central East are being resolved at this very moment. The Rank B portal that appeared in the port area has a raid scheduled in a few days by the Hunter Association. Jinwoo Sung takes advantage of his improvement to visit his mother, and her image lying like that reminds the boy of a scene from 4 years ago, when he held her in his arms after finding her unconscious. As soon as he takes the woman to the doctor, he and his sister discover that the mother has the eternal sleep disease, also known as final rest. It is a disease that emerged with the appearance of portals and affects approximately 1 in every 10,000 people. There are theories that it is caused by frequent exposure to mana, but regardless, the best that current medicine can offer to those with this disease is support, keeping the person alive but with no chance of recovery. So knowing that he will have to take care of his comatose mother for the rest of her existence, Jinwoo Sung endured the most arduous and humiliating tasks until he was accepted by the Hunter Association and had a salary that provided access to proper treatment for his mother. But soon he discovers that this profession is far from easy, and in the first few days he already realizes this, falling behind in most raids and getting injured frequently. In one of these expeditions, Jinwoo is kicked out of the group for not being able to help, and when the rest of the team makes it clear that even though they ordered him to leave, he won't receive payment since he didn't contribute. Worst of all, Jinwoo turned to them and apologized for being useless, on top of it all. Probably, this memory is the greatest incentive for him to focus so much on strength attribute points. Next, he embarks on his first solo mission, and upon reaching exit 3 of the Hapjeong subway station, he opens a lock that formed in front of him, and a portal opens. Upon crossing, he receives a message notifying him that he has entered the instance dungeon. The entrance behind him closes, but people around him continue to cross as if nothing is happening. With this, Jinwoo realizes that instance dungeons place him in a different dimension, just like red portals. Then he receives another message saying that he cannot leave until he kills the boss or uses a teleportation stone. Thus, he descends the stairs and comes face to face with 3 goblins. Images of him being gravely wounded by a creature of this race come back to him instantly, but this time he has no choice. No one there can help, and there is no easy way out of this dungeon. For this reason, he faces the enemies head-on, defending against their attacks until finding an opening for an offensive move, and on the first try, he slashes through a monster with his sword. Then he pierces the second goblin and also eliminates the last one. Thus, even though he is exhausted, he notices that he is indeed stronger. But now he really has to put it to the test as a lichen with a metal jaw enters the fray and destroys his knife. Jinwoo Sung's legs start to tremble, and sensing the fear, the lichen attacks again, slashing a cut on the hunter's face. After that, the wolf turns back to the target and advances again, each time closer to victory. To avoid the worst, Jinwoo manages to jump to avoid being hit by the pounce. After somersaulting in the air during the evasion, he realizes how light his body has become. Nevertheless, the lichen doesn't give up and prepares to attack again. Jinwoo, tired of taking beatings without retaliating, responds to the lichen's charge with a punch. The impact is so strong that it finally makes the protagonist feel the difference after investing so many points in his attributes. However, even this increase in strength is not enough to defeat the enemy in hand-to-hand combat. Moreover, Jinwoo has no group to cooperate in this fight, so it's just him against the opponent. Furthermore, Jinwoo only has food and water in his backpack, lamenting the fact that he has no magical weapon to defend himself. But at that moment, he recalls his last dungeon raid and pulls out his magical sword from the inventory, countering the Lycan and leveling up. Jinwoo remembers that he took the sword from Kim when he fled the statue dungeon, and that he paid 3 million for it. Next, 2 more Lycans approach, but Jinwoo no longer fears them because of his new weapon. The problem is that it got stuck in the ground with the last blow, causing the protagonist to panic. The Lycans take advantage to attack, but Jinwoo manages to pull the sword from the ground and strike. One opponent uses its steel fangs to hold the sword, but Jinwoo kicks the monster and then manages to make the cut with his weapon, destroying another enemy. Despite the difficulty, Jinwoo recalls the giant statues that tore him apart without mercy, and at least finds comfort in not facing a challenge of that magnitude. Regardless, it seems that the Lycan also briefly reflects on the danger is facing and decides to run away to avoid being destroyed. So Jinwoo has some time to sit, and analyzing his inventory realizes that he has leveled up and his wounds have been healed. Moreover, he gained 1 point for each attribute. Since daily missions only gave 1 point, he decides to focus on these fights to evolve. He also wonders if he should put points into other attributes like intelligence or dexterity, but concludes that it makes more sense to continue focusing on strength. Even with only 32 points in this attribute, he already feels his body much lighter. In the end, although he is not sure, he supposes that the higher his basic attributes increase, the more points he will gain. This gives him hope that one day he will truly become very strong. Then he looks for essence stones in the loot, but no such item is found. At least he discovers that there is a shop in the inventory, although newcomers cannot buy items. So he sells a Lycan Fang he found in the spoils and gets 20 gold coins. Jinwoo knows he needs to clear this dungeon before his food runs out, but he's not sure if he can defeat a boss alone, even if it's an E-level dungeon. He could find the teleportation stone, but he has no idea where to look. Therefore, the best idea is to level up in this dungeon until he can face the boss. To continue on a positive note, dozens of Lycans approach the boy and attack him, but even in the face of so many enemies, he feels no fear because he has already witnessed his own death once. Therefore, he engages in combat and manages to get rid of some creatures. He knows that even though it is not easy to defeat him, it is also not simple to deal with so many Lycans in a group, so it is always valid to be cautious. At this moment, he remembers when he struggled in normal jobs until he received the news that he qualified to be a hunter. He hoped to pay for his mother's treatment, but then remembered the moment when he was killed by the giant statues. With these memories in mind, Jinwoo promises to fight with intensity and advances against the opponents. He kills so many Lycans that, in addition to leveling up several times, he earns the title of Wolf Slayer. Meanwhile, some city pedestrians notice that a tunnel is becoming dangerous and wonder when the Hunter Association will do something about it, as there is a real risk of a dungeon break. Back at the station, Jinwoo sees that his sword is cracking from excessive use, so he wonders if it's time to leave. Meanwhile, his manga explains that players who achieve the title of Wolf Slayer have a 40% bonus in all attributes against animals. In addition, he sees that he has obtained 34 wolf fangs, 2 worn daggers, and a traveler's cape. But last and most important, he notices that he has obtained the teleportation stone. The acquisition of this item rekindles the doubt of whether to leave or not, but Jinwoo is afraid of not having another opportunity to gain XP so quickly again. According to Jinwoo Sung himself, he feels like dancing in the palm of Buddha's hand, considering everything he is experiencing without having any idea of how he got there. Meanwhile, Joey receives another call from the Hunter Association, being informed that the portal she was invited to defend has fallen victim to a dungeon break. She feels guilty for having refused the call, and remembering Jinwoo's determination even in the difficult situation he was going through, decides to help once and for all. The association was lacking healers in this battle, and the city was in great danger. Jinwoo continues to evolve non-stop until these hours of experience make him realize that enemies with white names are weaker than him, while orange ones are at his level and red ones are more powerful. He has leveled up so much that even the Lycans now have white names instead of the red ones they had when he first arrived. However, even though he has evolved so much, Jinwoo feels that he cannot defeat the boss down the staircase. Perhaps due to his increased perception, the feeling that he has no chance becomes more vivid. However, even though this monster gives him chills, he has reached level 15 and probably won't be able to level up in that dungeon. Moreover, the sword is becoming increasingly cracked, so it would be better for him to stop using it recklessly and go straight to where it really matters. Therefore, he descends the long staircase of the station until he reaches the lowest floor, and as soon as he steps there, A giant, fast creature crosses underwater to throw Jinwoo against the wall and break his sword. The boy rises and sees that he's in front of the Swamp King, the blue Kasaka of poisonous fangs. Even though Jinwoo has evolved a lot, the boss's name is still Orange, and just by looking at the creature, he realizes that he won't be able to pierce those scales with just a sword. Therefore, the strategy is to endure the heavy attacks from the snake until he discovers a weak point. The problem is that, until that moment arrives, he needs to survive, and the way things are going in this battle, he might not be able to do that. After several powerful attacks in a row, the giant snake throws an entire train carriage at the protagonist, and this display of power makes him feel small, even after putting so many points into strength. Ultimately, he wonders how many points he'll have to invest in this attribute to stop being seen as a joke. Speaking of which, he remembers when he was called the weakest hunter in humanity. In an old memory, a man encourages Jinwoo not to care about that nickname and to focus on proving to everyone that he is not what they say he is. Throughout his life, he has been ridiculed, and it made him feel ashamed of himself. When you are strong, you can handle challenges, help others, and be respected by those around you. On the other hand, when you are weak, you depend on the help of others and end up becoming a burden to your team. Society looks down on you, and even if you are intelligent, empathetic, or creative in the face of the strong, all of that becomes invisible. In the end, empathy doesn't win battles, and that's why Jinwoo was so determined to become the strongest of all, to prove that he can make a difference. So he tries to climb the snake's scales, even without conviction that he would gain anything from it, but he's quickly thrown to the ground again. However, as he rises once more, a blue aura envelops the protagonist, and he knows well that this enemy before him is nothing compared to the terror he experienced with those statues. This mentality brings the necessary determination for him to keep fighting, and this time with more confidence. After climbing to the top of the snake, he manages to leap onto the back of its neck, and with the blessing of his numerous strength points, he begins to crush the scales of the blue Kasaka with his bare hands. A snake tries to escape the opponent in every possible way, but Jinwoo Sung's strength is so great that the creature's head is severed. Exhausted, Jinwoo sees his own blood flowing throughout his body with the absurd effort he's exerting, while the gigantic monster lies dead in front of him, and his virtual menu indicates that he has leveled up several times. Moreover, he is rewarded with a dagger made from Kasaka venom. In addition to having double the damage of Kim's sword, it has paralysis and draining bonuses. On the other hand, Jinwoo is afraid to use a venom gland he looted because the effect of this item is to harden the user's skin, but at the cost of the muscles being affected by the Kasaka's venom. So he leaves this item stored away while receiving the notification that the dungeon has been cleared, and for this reason it will be restored to its original state. With everything back to normal, Jinwoo leaves the station and comes face to face with a soldier warning that the boy shouldn't be there after all. You should already be aware of what happened with the latest news. But shortly after this statement, the soldier notices the sword in the boy's hand and discovers that he is a hunter, and for this reason, he apologizes for everything he said and takes Jinwoo Sung directly to the ongoing battle. During the walk, the protagonist sees the wreckage of a dungeon break along the way, and the soldier warns that almost everything is under control, but the most dangerous creature is still missing. Through his perception, Jinwoo feels that this monster is nearby through a blue light shining in another part of the city. On the other side of the buildings, a huge golem terrorizes the city, while ordinary citizens are controlled at a safe distance, and the hunters take the front line against the invader. The commander of the hunters tells the healers to do everything to keep the tank standing, but the damage dealers of the group are not managing to hit the monster enough because they need hunters who use magic. Jinwoo notices that this group was put together hastily, so they have no synergy together. Moreover, there are 6 rank E and 2 rank D, so they are too weak for such a threat. Despite all this, he sees a rank B healer in the middle of the battlefield. It was Joey being urged by the other healer in the team to do something useful since she was paralyzed by fear. She tries to cast a healing spell, but the image of the evil statue invades the girl's mind and shakes her again. Jinwoo observes the difficulty of his friend and does not judge her because, in addition to witnessing the same trauma, he was once like her, consumed by fear and unable to react. However, not anymore. In the face of this creature, Jinwoo knows that it is of rank D, just like the giant snake at the station, so he has a chance to help in the fight. Therefore, he leaps towards the enemy to support the hunters and breaks the enemy's defense to leave it vulnerable. Thus, the rest of the group attacks and causes real damage to the opponent until they destroy the golem. The team's tank is amazed at the power of whoever threw that magical sword, considering that a group of 10 hunters was having so much difficulty facing this enemy, even in good numbers. Looking for the author of the magical strike, the tank asks a soldier who threw that sword in the middle of the battle, and the soldier looks back in an attempt to find the guy, but Jinwoo was already far away. The tank wonders what level this hunter must be to be able to do that, while Joey seems to know that it was her friend who caused that turnaround in the fight. As for Jin Woo-sung himself, he seems much more mature and aware of his ability, but he didn't even imagine that that single blow could cause all of that, so he believes that the golem was already quite weakened by the time he arrived. The next day, Jinwoo is hitting the gym hard, while some nurses comment on how handsome this patient is in addition to having an incredible body. When this patient arrived, he didn't attract much attention, but he hasn't stopped exercising since then and got ripped, and that happened too quickly for the short time he's been there. Shortly after, one of these nurses enters Jinwoo's room and sees him shirtless. She feels embarrassed for being attracted to the guy's body and ends up speechless, but soon she composes herself and informs Jinwoo that he'll be discharged today, asking how he's feeling. He replies that he's feeling great thanks to the nurses and her colleagues' work. The nurse thanks him for the compliment and informs him that he should go down to the reception so they can take care of the paperwork. Jinwoo feels grateful for the care he received and heads for the stairs, but before he leaves, the girl gathers courage and asks for his number. Innocently, Jinwoo thinks it's to send the test results to her after discharge, so he gives his contact to the girl. Meanwhile, on the Ultra Morning newspaper, the presenter receives a very special guest named Bak Yoon-ho, one of the country's 7th-rank hunters. Due to his high level, the presenter asks if the hunter's daily life is very hectic and wants to know what he does when he's not in dungeons. Bak replies that every day is a training day and that it's necessary in addition to always being in combat to keep reflexes sharp. But in his case, he has developed the habit of training all the time because he used to be a firefighter, and in that profession, the smallest mistake can cost a companion's life, and that thought has always guided his path. Jaina was watching this program before leaving for school, but she soon realizes it's time to leave, so she was to say goodbye to her brother. He had just woken up, so she informs him that yesterday's leftovers are in the fridge while noticing her brother's ripped abs. Therefore, she asks if he's been working out and if the gym makes you taller, since he seems taller now. Then she jokes that she didn't know men grew even after they got old, and then she gets ready to go to school. Before she leaves, Jinwoo reminds her to take an umbrella, but Jaina finds it too heavy, besides it's very sunny today. However, Jinwoo is devoted to the popular saying that prevention is better than cure, and stuffs the umbrella into his sister's backpack. With Jaina's departure, Jinwoo opens his training menu and sees that he has already completed all the day's tasks, except for the 10-kilometer run, which he left for later. As for the muscles he developed, he wonders if they are the result of the strength stats he has focused on more, or if he'll end up looking like a bodybuilder if he keeps working out. And speaking of that, he hasn't used the points he gained from the last level. Reflecting on where to allocate them, he concludes that strength is the most important to him, but that absurd damage is useless if he doesn't hit the blow. Therefore, it seems like a good idea to invest in agility. Vitality is good to have, and perception has been very useful, but he's not sure about intelligence. It seems to be related to magic, so he's not sure if he needs it. Anyway, he decides to level up strength, agility, and perception. Right at that moment, the owner of the house he rents calls to collect this month's rent, as Jinwoo hasn't paid yet, and the tenant promises to pay as soon as possible. After ending the call, the protagonist looks at the screen of his cell phone and wonders if this experience he's going through is some kind of second awakening, but now that he can easily kill goblins, maybe paying the rent shouldn't be a much harder challenge. Instead, he prefers 1,000 times to face a battalion of goblins. And maybe that's the solution to paying the rent, so Jinwoo enters a hunter's app, where they act in raid services in exchange for money. Jinwoo is looking for a higher level challenge to score some good money, but he imagines that nobody will accept a rank E in this type of difficulty. For this reason, maybe it would be better for him to ask for a revaluation and, who knows, rise in rank to have more chance of getting higher paying jobs. However, Jinwoo remembers that he underwent a red awakening, and that this is extremely rare to happen, and the fact that he is a hunter who can level up would attract all the world's attention, and the press would throw all the world's expectations on his back. Because, as they say, the nail that sticks out gets hammered. So he decides to take a break until he learns to defend himself better and understand his abilities. And in the meantime, a notification arrives on his cell phone. Hours later, Jinwoo had just completed his daily run and went to collect his reward, which besides full energy recovery and plus 3 attribute points, gave him a random loot box. Then, a group of hunters approaches and their leader, Hwang Dong-suk, is the first to greet Jinwoo. A guy who was right behind recognizes Jinwoo, remembering him as the weakest hunter in humanity. The other members of the group start laughing, but Dong-suk tells them to stop clowning around and apologizes to the newbie for the comments. Despite this, the boy doesn't seem as psyched as he used to be in the past and soon asks the team leader about the next steps. Dong-suk informs him that they're going to a C-rank dungeon and they need at least 8 people to enter, and at least half of those 8 need to be rank C. Since Jinwoo won't fight, he won't be entitled to a share of the loot that they will pay 2 million for participation. As the man spoke, Jinwoo analyzed that the group has 4 C-rank members and 2 D-rank members. So he agrees to the terms and asks what his role is in this raid, and the boss replies that he'll carry everyone's luggage such as food, clothes, and equipment in addition to a first aid kit. Jinwoo asks if they intend to go without a healer, and the leader recalls how difficult it is for independent groups to find healers, but as they've always done without a healer, they have experience with it. Jinwoo understands the reason, but thinks it's crazy to enter a dungeon with practically only tanks. Then Hwang passes the pen for the young man to sign the contract, and he reads that one of the conditions is that the group is not responsible for anything that happens inside the dungeon. Still, he signs and hands over the document. Soon after, the last member to meet the quota arrives on the team, a 21-year-old D-rank hunter named Yoo Jin-ho. Despite his low level, the guy sported one of the most powerful and shiny armors, and right off the bat, everyone figures he must be a rich kid. Yoo Jin-ho assures he'll protect the protagonist, and they all set off for the mission. During the hike, Yoo asks Jinwoo if he's okay since those backpacks seem heavy, and Jinwoo thanks him for the concern but says he's fine. Later, the 21-year-old starts recounting the story of the former company president they were passing by who fled abroad 2 months ago, taking away 900 billion embezzled. Seeing Jinwoo's disinterest, Yoo apologizes for not being aware of when he's bothering others. Arriving at the portal, the team notices it's too big to be a C-rank, but Hwang confirms that the association checked twice. Yoo asks the new colleague if they shouldn't worry more about the size of this portal, but Jinwoo Sung informs that what matters is not the size but the level of magical power emanating from within, and that's what the Hunter Association evaluates when classifying. Dangerous dungeons ranked B or higher are handled by larger guilds. Those ranked C and below shouldn't be as dangerous. He compliments the bag carrier's knowledge on these matters, and he recalls he's been a hunter for a long time, even though he's never entered a C-rank portal. Finally, the time has come, and they all cross the barrier into the dungeon. Since it was very dark, Q1 casts an illumination spell, and everyone is confused by the fact that this dungeon has no monsters and is completely dark, unlike others which are filled with glowing stones that light up the place. These cave characteristics remind Jinwoo of the Kartanon Temple, where all that tragedy happened. At this moment, the colleague in shiny armor asks him what those glowing stones are, and he explains they're rocks that emit a faint light, quite common in cave-type dungeons. With this new information, Yoo recites all the stones he learned about, including the Essence Stone obtained from magical monsters, the Mana Stone, which can be mined from dungeons, and this glowing stone, which illuminates caves. Yoo finds it easy to confuse them all, but the bag carrier promises he'll get used to it. As the group reaches a part divided into 3 paths, Yoo gets tense and thinks there's nothing in this place, so he asks Jinwoo if there are dungeons without monsters, but the protagonist tells him to be quiet because his perception indicates that a strange sound is coming from somewhere. Therefore, magical monsters are around there somewhere, just haven't shown themselves yet. With the discovery, the team prepares for any imminent threat, while Jinwoo wonders what kind of creature hides in the shadows and is attracted by light, and soon concludes they're insect-type monsters. At this moment, sounds coming from all sides seem louder and more intense, and the whole team seems like they're going to panic because they can't see any enemies. They look to all the tunnels for any sign until a bunch of giant ants emerges from above. Apart from Q1, the archers try to prevent the enemies from getting close, but soon they manage to reach the ground. Therefore, Dong-suk uses a provocation skill to attract all opponents to him. And with this protection, Q1 has time to cast a powerful spell that eliminates several enemies at once, giving the rest a chance to advance toward victory. Watching the fight, Jinwoo recognizes that this team is very well coordinated, and indeed, they must have been fighting together for a long time. And as for Yoo Jin-ho, it seems like the equipment makes up for the lack of skill. But even though they're doing well, something doesn't seem right in this story. Soon the battle is won, and the members divide all the essence stones among themselves. Dong-suk thanks the bag carrier's perception for anticipating the trap, and Jinwoo replies that it's just part of his instinct. However, Q1 notices that many ants weren't killed by sword or magic strikes, so the group thinks there might be a stronger creature in that place doing so. Meanwhile, he tries to brag about the ant he killed, and Jinwoo asks where he got that expensive equipment from. So the boy replies that his father wanted to give him something nice for his first raid. Therefore, Jinwoo asks the young man to be very careful. Outside the dungeon, the master of a guild, Bak Yoon-ho, is smashing a huge stone in one blow during training. Then he states that wasn't even the warm-up and orders someone to clean up the debris. Back in the cave, Jinwoo is commenting to the new colleague that making money without fighting is a good deal, but deep down, the protagonist feels it's almost too good to be true since he still has a nagging feeling. And as they walked, everyone observes various insects injured along the way. As they light up the route, they notice the entrance to the boss chamber and continue the journey. Further into the cave, they discover tons of mana crystals. Therefore, one of the members comments to Dong-suk that even his brother would be envious, and Kyuwon tells the boy not to mention the leader's brother's name. In the meantime, the leader was thinking about how even his youngest is sometimes right, and he's going to use these resources to develop his attack team and not be subservient to him anymore. Meanwhile, you had read Jinwoo's contract and is going to contest a clause with the contractor saying that Jinwoo wouldn't receive a share of the battle drops. But since the mana crystals are mined, the division should be by 8. Dong-suk smiles and confirms they'll do that, but first they need to deal with that giant spider up there. And since the portal closes once the dungeon boss is destroyed, everyone needs to mine as many crystals as possible before facing the arachnid, taking advantage that it's asleep. Then he asks a member about the excavation equipment, but he replies he didn't expect to find so many minerals, so he left the tools in the car. Therefore, Dong-suk decides to go back to get everything, and tells Yu and Jinwoo to stay there in the meantime since the spider is full and shouldn't wake up. Despite Yu's outrage, they leave, and at that moment, Jinwoo remembers the group's claim that they always tackle rank C dungeons without a healer, so he wonders why they didn't have any known hunters to call instead of him and Yu. During his reflection, Dong-suk instructs Kyuwon to seal the boss chamber, dropping debris at the entrance to prevent the duo's escape. Consequently, Jinwoo recalls a moment when a man said that in this field there are always scoundrels because missions take place in isolated locations, making it easy for crimes to occur. Therefore, sometimes the weaker ones are left as bait, like a lizard leaving its tail behind. In one of those tales, Yu Jinho punches a mana crystal, lamenting having to die over a simple division of assets. He thinks that perhaps he would have lived if he hadn't mentioned the contract, but Jinwoo knew that the group was ready to kill them at the first wrong move. However, they didn't need to get their hands dirty with blood since the spider finally awakens, while Yu instructs the baggage carrier to protect himself behind him. Jinwoo is analyzing escape routes, thinking that some tunnels in the vicinity would likely be the exit the Dong-suk group would use. Looking back at the dungeon boss, he considers this an unfair battle, but when memories of Cartnon resurface, he asserts that he will handle the spider alone. Meanwhile, Dong-suk's group retreats until the conflict is resolved, and one of the subordinates asks if they should leave the two inside instead of just finishing them off. The leader explains that doing so would wake up the spider, risking them not being able to return to collect the resources they desire. But with the two trapped inside, the spider will eat them and then go back to sleep, giving them time to gather everything undisturbed. Plus, with that playboy dead, Yu Jinwoo, they'll be able to get that shielded armor, which alone must be worth around 10 million. So even if they don't have time to extract the crystals, just that will fetch a high sum. Speaking of the boy Jinwoo, ironically, Dong-suk comments that they should see which wealthy family he's from because it would look bad not to attend the funeral. Next, Kyuwon questions if the spider won't be mad because of the noise they made collapsing the entrance. Then Dong-suk responds that regardless of her mood, they are in a group and can handle the situation, unlike those two low-ranked brats, who no matter what they do will end up in the spider's belly. In the meantime, Jinwoo-sung seems confident that this won't be his fate, while Yu tries to convince the protagonist that he would need to be at rank B to defeat this rank C boss, or at least be on the same level as the arachnid, but extremely well equipped, which isn't the case. And despite the confidence, Jinwoo agrees with his companion. Even with the resurgence, he is still weak, and the bosses he faced, like the Blue Kasaka and the Golem, were of lower ranks than this boss now, which means he's facing a much bigger challenge than before. Despite this, Jinwoo-sung doesn't flinch in this situation, and something inside him keeps affirming that he can handle this spider. After all, he's at level 18, so it's worth a try. With that, he advances towards the enemy, and living up to the title of hunter he possesses, Jinwoo begins his hunt. In the meantime, Go-Gunny, the president of the Hunters Association, is tired of these meetings with politicians and energy companies he's forced to attend day after day since he's never been good at politics. That's why Woo Jinchul invites the boss to a training battle to relax a bit. So the Go jokes that the veterans try to retire, but the younger ones keep asking for advice, keeping the old ones active. Meanwhile, Jinwoo is seeking a way to hit the opponent since he's having trouble penetrating the exoskeleton with his sword. Furthermore, he needs to pay close attention to the spider's attacks because one of those paw strikes would be enough to bury him alive. And watching the fight from behind, Yu notices that guy there is nowhere near an E rank, so he definitely falsified his rank. He's just another one of those crazies who pretend to be weaker than they really are just to take on lower challenges and kill for fun. And as he convinced himself of that, he wondered more and more where he ended up. Meanwhile, Jinwoo was getting more and more tired and seeing his speed gradually decreasing, which means he needs to find a way to turn this game around before he becomes an easy prey for the spider. That's why he rummaged through his inventory to see if he could find a solution, and he sees in the venomous fang of Kasaka the hope of defeating the enemy with its paralysis and draining powers. Therefore, the hunter must find a weak point to penetrate the spider's skin, and the dagger's poison would take care of the rest. However, the enemy had a trump card up its sleeve, releasing acid onto the battlefield and showing Jinwoo that he couldn't approach thoughtlessly. But still, the protagonist doesn't have much choice, because if he tires too much, he'll become spider food. For this reason, he uses his new ability called Sprint to speed towards the rival. Thus, the 10 kilometers run per day seems to have some effect on the strength of the boy's legs, who is launched like a missile towards the dungeon boss, giving him a chance to attack with his dagger on her face. However, even this part of the arachnid's body was extremely resistant, so Jinwoo starts losing his cool and desperately attacking every part of the body he can. But this impatience led his body to reach a fatigue level of 70, further limiting some of his movements. Faced with slowness, the spider manages to hit the human and throw him to the ground with force. So Jinwoo seemed resigned to his fate, but when the enemy was about to end the fight using its claw, he uses a full recovery bonus and replenishes his energy. This time he couldn't mess up, so in his new attempt to attack, he unleashes numerous dagger blows on one of the spider's eyes, throwing all of the Kasaka venom onto the spider's body. Thus, in a few seconds, the dungeon boss falls to the ground without a chance to react. With the victory, Jinwoo instantly levels up a few levels, while feeling relieved that he didn't use all of his total recovery rewards from his daily training runs, because without them, it would have been quite complicated. Meanwhile, he was simply astonished by what he just witnessed. He simply can't believe that the Ranky baggage handler from his expedition group was able to defeat a giant rank C spider, so now he's sure the guy falsified his real level. And during his thought, the protagonist collects the essence stone from the cave boss and wonders how much such a thing must be worth. And being no fool, he already puts his colleague's baggage on his back and hands him a bottle of water while asking him to rest, while Yu himself digs up all the crystals from the location. Jinwoo Sung doesn't understand the reason for this strange behavior, but this is put on the back burner when Dong-suk's group emerges from one of the cave entrances and notices that the two rookies are still alive. At the same time, the experienced Go Gunhee agrees to practice with Woo Jinchul and shows that even though he's old, he still maintains an incredible shape, demonstrating incredible strength by subduing the hunter's surveillance administrator. Jinchul recognizes the president's strength and thanks him for having had the opportunity to train with him, while the leader demonstrates great humility and leadership by praising the subordinate's development and emphasizing that even if these exercises don't raise Jinchul's rank, it's still possible to practice and polish new techniques that can be useful in dungeons, where danger is always extreme and people's true nature really shows. And this nature becomes more evident in Dong-suk and his team as they delve into the chaos and upon seeing the spider carcass conclude that it was probably a much weaker creature than they imagined to be defeated by two weaklings like that. At least that rich kid Yu's expensive armor seems to have tanked the dungeon boss. So Dong-suk remarks that this rich kid's equipment seems to be quite useful and asks if his father is Yu Myung-in, president of Yu Construction. Since the guy didn't deny it, the leader sends a proposal to him, where he should finish off Jinwoo Sung to become an accomplice to everything that happened there and have his life spared. Dong-suk had no intention of keeping the daddy's boy alive, but seeing the dungeon boss's corpse there on the side, he fears that this armor might have some special bonus that he can't predict, so he wanted to expose the user to a new conflict to analyze the real power of this equipment. Faced with this, Dong-suk pressures Yu to do what he says, as what happens in the dungeon stays in the dungeon. So the boy approaches Jinwoo, leaving Dong-suk anxious for what's to come, but he turns against the group, who then prepares to deal with a weaker enemy before Yu. And at that moment, Jinwoo Sung receives an urgent mission, where he should eliminate any present threat to ensure his own safety. And if he doesn't complete this mission, he'll suffer a penalty. However, the challenge shows that it wouldn't be so easy, as Kyuwon unleashes a lightning bolt on the protagonist that isolates him far away. Meanwhile, three friends meet at a cafe, and a green-eyed girl named Heejin is asked about how things are going at the White Tiger Guild. She replies that everything is as it has always been, while her blonde friend, Gina, says that the Hunters Association is also the same. Then Heejin asks if it's true that Gina is going to start an A-rank dungeon training with Cha-ha, one of the guild's legends. Gina explains that it has already happened, and on that occasion, they were having problems with a powerful creature from the elite dungeon until Cha-ha ended the monster as if it were the easiest thing in the world, leaving everyone amazed, but especially Kikmoon, since he was a candidate for captain of the attack squad. By the way, Jenna asks about that guy, Chul, who also intended to be captain, but Heejin doesn't think he's anything special. But despite everything, we're still in the Hunters Guild and the White Tiger, the biggest ones so far, unlike other organizations with sinister stories about mysterious deaths of their members in dungeons. In the meantime, Jinwoo seems dead in the eyes of those present, but he still lives, reflecting deeply on why the world is a place of so many lies and betrayals. Jinwoo was careless again and underestimated the evil that people are capable of, and this time even the system that guides him wants him to kill people. Strangely, it seems that this device wants to keep him alive and strong. And since the system wants to use Jinwoo, Jinwoo will also use the system. As he slowly advances against the enemies laughing at him, the protagonist thinks about how the law of the jungle prevails in such places. Then Junti asks to leave the world's weakest hunter with him, then embraces Jinwoo and asks what an E-rank fool can do against them with his arrogance. Therefore, Jinwoo shows in practice what he had in mind by separating the enemy's head from the rest of the body. Dong-suk knows that Junti was careless, but still, he was a D rank. The E rank that ended his life doesn't feel so bad for having killed his first human. After all, he has no choice, and if only the strongest survive, Jin Woo-sung will finish standing. With that in mind, he moves like the wind towards each of his enemies and knocking them down one by one without giving them a chance to be touched. Even the talented Kyuwon is eliminated second to last without much effort, until only the leader of the expedition group, Hwang Dong-suk, remains. Seeing his team being massacred in a few seconds, the boss realizes who really killed that giant spider. But unlike his subordinates, Dong-suk is a distinguished C-rank hunter, and he shows it by using his enhancement ability. Soon he analyzes that Jinwoo must be tired after facing the spider and his companions. Besides, his strengths are speed and the poisonous dagger, but thanks to Dong-suk's enhancement, his body has become as strong as steel, so the dagger won't be able to penetrate his skin. However, Jin Woo-sung shows that having spent all this time leveling up makes anyone of C rank seem nothing compared to him. So he throws Dong-suk's head on the ground, realizing that he has no chance against that hunter, so he begs for mercy and swears that he will pay whatever Jin Woo-sung wants if spared. But the protagonist remembers that this man tried to kill him 3 times and now comes to beg in such a ridiculous way. And as Dong-suk himself said, what happens in the dungeon stays in the dungeon. Faced with the end, the man tries to flaunt his influence, warning that he is the brother of someone important, but Jinwoo couldn't care less and ends the service right then. Later, the guild investigator isn't buying the story that all the C ranks were wiped out and only the D and E ranks remain. Besides, the protocol officer takes a look at the Playboy's car, seeing that it's the Carrion Longsword from Maya Company, and gets excited about this new release she's been waiting for. Meanwhile, Jinwoo sees the rewards from the mission, where he notices this skill, Killer Intent, which reduces all enemies' attributes by half and can be applied to multiple enemies at once. After the investigation, Yu is thanking Jin Woo-sung for everything that happened in the dungeon, but the protagonist is only concerned if his sister is using the umbrella he asked her to take earlier today. Meanwhile, on a high altar of a building, a new character is about to be revealed. The next day, news reaches Jinchul that 6 hunters were killed in a C-rank raid, with only 1 D-rank and 1 E-rank survivor. Jinchul initially assumes it's another case of weaker members fleeing after the stronger ones were killed, but his assistant reveals that both survivors left the dungeon after defeating the boss. Yu Jinho, the D-rank, possesses expensive equipment, and the other survivor is Jin Woo-sung. Upon hearing this name, the administrator becomes pensive and more interested in the case. The assistant adds that one of the deceased in the dungeon was Dong-suk, Dong-su's older brother. Turning to the protagonist, his sister sees him returning home with fried chicken and asks what good thing happened for him to do this, but he replies he's unsure if it was good or not. He then reveals he saved money for their mother's treatment, while his sister jokingly remarks that he's finally stopped being stingy. Afterward, they sit together and Gina comments that Jinwoo returned from the dungeon without a scratch, indicating his team must have been very strong. Jinwoo confirms they were indeed strong, while memories of the actual situation flash through his mind, a true massacre that Jin Woo-sung orchestrated without hesitation. Lost in thought, Jinwoo's sister asks what's wrong, and he pretends to be trying to remember if the group returned his raid change. Jaina is reassured by this explanation, and Jinwoo reflects that as long as he stays alive and protects his family, everything will be fine. If that involves repeating what happened in the dungeon, so be it. He'd do it all over again. Suddenly, a message arrives informing the protagonist of a harmful substance in his body, but the system quickly notifies him that he's been detoxified. Thus, he bids his sister farewell and heads to his room. Upstairs, he realizes he can't get drunk even after consuming many cans of beer because apparently the system has a function that breaks down alcohol. Pondering this, he searches until he finds one of the rewards for completing the mission, an ability called Blessing, which grants him immunity to toxic and foreign conditions, as well as enhancing his regeneration capacity. Realizing this was the reward from the double dungeon, he understands how he was able to regenerate his severed limbs. As night falls, Gina informs her brother that someone named Yu Jinho is on the phone. Seeing beer cans scattered around the room, she advises him not to drink so much as it's bad for his health, and when she becomes a doctor and has to treat him for it, she'll refuse. Sometime later, Jinwoo meets with Yu and comments that he didn't expect to see him again in this life. After the D-rank thanks the protagonist for saving his life, Jinwoo thanks him in return for never revealing what truly happened in that dungeon. This makes Yu nervous, arguing they acted in self-defense, and then tries to invite Jinwoo to form a group. However, before he can finish the sentence, Jinwoo interrupts and declines in advance, saying he doesn't intend to hang out with the daddy's boy. Despite this, Yu pleads with him to listen, promising he'll be well rewarded. He finally gets Jinwoo's attention and explains he needs his help to complete 20 raids and obtain a guild master license. Since he studied to take over his inheritance, passing the theoretical exam wouldn't be a problem, but the practical part is another matter. Taking the conversation, Jinwoo asks if the boy is the second heir of Yujin Construction, and after confirming, Yu mentions his father wants the company to have his own guild. Jinwoo presumes his father wants to enter the hunter business to be self-sufficient and profit independently from raids. Yu confirms this, adding that the idea is to have an S rank as master and his brother as vice commander, managing the guild like a company. Jinwoo remarks that finding an S rank will be difficult as there are only 9 in the whole country, and the only one without a guild retired, Min Byung-gu. Furthermore, if Yu's father wants to attract a higher S rank, it will create friction between the two guilds. Seeing the hunter isn't very confident with this plan, Yu is more assertive, stating Jinwoo's son needs partners to join raids while hiding his own rank, and for Yu, it's better to do these expeditions alongside an E rank rather than looking for someone higher level. After his declaration, the boy reflects alone that the boss of the next dungeon they plan to invade might be at B rank or even higher. Then he shows the guild project, mentioning the estimated value for the headquarters building is 30 billion, and this will be the reward for the 19 C rank raids Jinwoo is supposed to participate in, with the spiders being the first. Thinking to himself, the protagonist believes in the past he would have jumped at this proposal, but being the only hunter to evolve, he will surely become an S rank one day, perhaps even surpassing that if possible. Considering this possibility, the value is low for what he can deliver. Furthermore, not knowing how leveling up affects him, collaborating with others could be risky. So Jinwoo declines the offer and heads for the exit, but Yu insists one last time, saying if he accepts, he'll take Jinwoo Sung's secret to the grave. In response, Jinwoo looks back at the playboy with an expression that needs no explanation, and that seems to settle the situation once and for all. Later it's revealed that the man on top of the building is Hwang Dong-soo, Dong-suk's younger brother, who has just learned of his brother's death and begins to move his pieces. He demands the case paperwork from his secretary and asks her what would happen if he killed someone in another country. She explains that in a country with a hunter detention and extradition treaty, he would be tried in that country. If there is no treaty, he will be judged by the law of the country where he lives, possibly negotiating a reduced sentence with the government. Being very busy, Dong-soo asks the secretary to make room in his schedule to resolve this situation. But as it would affect the guild, he'll have to wait until there's a gap in the programming. With that settled, he looks at the faces of the two criminals and hopes they'll still be alive when he arrives. Early the next morning, Jaina and Jinwoo are exercising together, and in the middle of their run, Jinwoo asks what the girl would do if she suddenly came into possession of 30 billion. Jaina would pay for her mother's treatment, go to college, and maybe save the rest. She can't say why since it's never going to happen anyway. Jinwoo agrees and tells Jaina she can run at her own pace, then he speeds ahead. Unable to keep up, Jaina comments that the boy may be rank E, but he's still a hunter. In her absence, Jinwoo accepts the reward for another day of training, but before he notices that the system counted the run of the goal, tallying the 11 kilometers he ran instead of closing in at 10 as usual. To clear his doubts, he does 2 more push-ups and notices that this 2 was added to the goal, so he decides to see how far this could go. At that moment, Jaina had just caught up with him, but soon he leaves her in the dust again. After a while, he sees that the system has doubled the goal, so he questions what he ran beyond that. Soon he doubles the goal for all exercises with 200 push-ups, 200 sit-ups, and 200 squats, which unlocks a secret reward, consisting of a blessed mysterious box and another cursed one. First, he opens the blessed one, revealing a key to enter the Demon Castle dungeon. Furthermore, it can be used in the Daeseong Tower in Sampagu. The problem is that the acquisition difficulty of this key is level S, which worries the boy. Reading the mission description, he sees that in the Demon King's castle, he can obtain the ingredients for the life elixir, capable of curing any disease through powerful magic. At dusk, he visits his mother and in front of her wonders if this life elixir would be able to bring her back permanently. Holding on to this hope, he decides to pursue this goal. As he opens the portal to the dungeon, he thinks that the dungeon's difficulty could be rank S, just like the rarity of the key. Meaning with monsters like those from Jeju Island, which even troubled rank as hunters. As he prepares to enter, Jinwoo questions whether he will be able to face enemies of this caliber. Entering the dungeon, he confesses to himself that he's afraid, but still he has an instant teleport stone in case he's really threatened. And just as he takes his first steps inside, Cerberus, the guardian of hell, appears before the protagonist, who knows he can't turn back now, always keeping in mind the life elixir he can obtain from there. So he draws the Wolf Slayer dagger, and using his sprint ability, charges at the three-headed dog. Cutting the creature's body several times, he recoils when he notices his attacks have had no effect even with the weapon's characteristic he carries. So he activates his new and stronger technique, the assassination intention, but Cerberus responds with a roar that nullifies the human's ability. Since that's the case, he returns to straightforward combat, but the paralysis and draining effects of the dagger still fail to affect the infernal dog. This time, Cerberus shows his business card and retaliates against the attack suffered, ripping Jinwoo's arm off with a bite, only to then crush his body with his paw. Just with that, the hunter loses almost half of his HP, so he decides to be more cautious and retreats once again. Analyzing his opponent, he discovers that Cerberus is using his Fury ability, which doubles all user attributes for 3 minutes. But before devising a strategy based on this, Jinwoo takes another blow and sees his life points drop even further. So he tries not to stand still in battle to avoid this kind of mistake. Activating his total recovery to regenerate his arm, he returns to the fight and pierces the enemy's eye. But a notification arrives immediately, warning that Cerberus is not feeling any pain. Then the dog isolates and crushes the hunter several times, who can't react to the unbeatable strength and speed of the beast. Meanwhile, Jinwoo sees his HP dwindling, and the fact that he has dropped below 30% of life has imposed a debuff on him of minus 50% damage. Faced with the massacre, the system keeps notifying the player at every moment, making him realize that this is not just any second awakening. At first, he thinks of enduring Cerberus's 3 minutes of fury for a chance, but he soon realizes that it's too risky. So he pulls out his teleport stone to bail out before things go south, but a stomp from the enemy makes the stone fly out of his hand. Now his life was near its end, and he was without the instrument that would get him out of there once and for all. At that moment, he searches the system for a solution, and he ends up remembering the store that the menu offered for potions and such. So he buys 3 basic healing potions, which heal a few life points. After that, he rummages through his inventory and sees Kasaka's poison gland, which hardens the user's skin but permanently damages the muscles with poison. However, Jinwoo remembers that he obtained the blessing ability, making him immune to toxic effects. With that in mind, he only has one option left to try, so he ingests the entire substance and sees the blessing preventing the venom's effect. Cerberus appears to finish off the hunter, but when struck again, he feels that his body suffers much less from the opponent's monstrous impact. Moreover, the dog's fury has just ended, making him feel the absurd pain of his pierced eye. Noticing the turn of events, Jinwoo goes all out, tearing into the body of the hellish animal. However, Cerberus manages to bite the protagonist, who feels his life slipping away, but at the same time, the hardening effect of the gland keeps him active. With that, he pierces the enemy's other eye several times with hatred, causing a rain of blood that extinguishes the fire around. With the victory, Jinwoo gains several levels in addition to obtaining the castle door key by defeating the Guardian and the formula to make the life elixir, with 3 items needed to create this substance. After nearly losing his life in this battle, Jinwoo knows it's best to enter this castle only after he's sure he can face what's inside, so he promises that one day he will return. As soon as he emerges from the dungeon, Jinwoo heads straight to visit his mother to see how she's doing and reaffirm his promise to make her better. There are 3 ingredients he needs to prepare the elixir of life, and all he has to do is get stronger to the level where he can enter that castle and do what is necessary for her. To finance his goal, he goes back to Yu and reverses his decision. Now he will join the boy to conquer the 19 raids, but with the condition that they both enter all the dungeons alone. Facing this, Yu loses some of his excitement and reminds his companion that 8 people are required to enter rank C dungeons, so Jinwoo explains that they could hire the other members, just like Dong-suk did, and this way they could complete their missions without anyone from outside getting hurt. And in addition, this feat could even help Yu impress his father. Therefore, Yu accepts the requirement and asserts that he will take care of the preparations for the upcoming expeditions. Meanwhile, Chaha is in the middle of her running training when she notices a man watching her and asks what he wants. The man apologizes for interrupting her training, saying he didn't know the best time to approach the lady. Then Bionville hands her a card from Yujin Construction, Yu's father's company. At that moment, the businessman was talking to his youngest son about the appearance of the dungeons, which had caused significant changes in society, such as in its perception of the economy, the media, and even politics. As for his company, this change came in infrastructure, so necessary for everyone's life. There are no more sophisticated operations without the resources provided by these dungeons, and the only ones capable of collecting these items are the hunters. In turn, they are supervised by a public institution, the Hunters Association, which recruits, registers, ranks, and supervises each of its members. In addition, they oversee the portals that do not go to auction and take care of dungeon breaks. However, the association is still just a state service, so it does not aim for profit in these endeavors. Most of these vital resources end up in the hands of guilds, which are companies that hire hunters for this type of service, making it an extremely lucrative business. Guilds like the Hunters, White Tiger, Reapers, Famed Guild, and Knights Guild are the largest in the country. In practice, they have a monopoly on dungeon profits, and the powerful owner of Yujin Construction does not want this to continue because these are necessary resources for human life and should not be in the hands of mere mercenaries who use all this money as they please. Yujin Construction has always provided services to society, and it is not going to change now, so its owner has decided to start his own guild. Listening attentively, Yujin agrees but thinks to himself that hiring an S-rank hunter to work with his brother could be very risky, but at least he won't go through it himself. At that moment, his partner was training and notices that the system is no longer counting the exercises he does above the goal. Because of this, he thinks that the cursed mystery box offered in the secret mission is out of reach at the moment, but he hopes that the random loot box he got will give him an item as valuable as the key to the Demon Castle dungeon. So he uses the item with this expectation but ends up getting a used bingo card. Reviewing his very high attributes, the hunter realizes that just 3 points are not enough to change anything for him, so he needs to find a more effective way to evolve. He thinks about facing that giant centipede in the penalty zone, but even today he is not sure if he would be able to defeat that creature. Besides, it is not guaranteed that he will gain XP in a punitive mission. Therefore, Jimwoo is content to find raid jobs for rank D dungeons. In another part of the country, Song Chiul duels with wooden swords, and the younger man praises his master for his performance. The more experienced fighter smiles and replies that he is not ready to lose yet, even though he lost his arm a few months ago and cannot give his all. Then he receives an emergency call and regrets it because rank D hunters are usually not called for anything more serious than buying bread at the bakery. Facing this, his pupil asks why he doesn't retire, and Chiul agrees that an old man without an arm really shouldn't be much help anymore. Embarrassed, the student tries to explain that it wasn't what he meant, but Chiul wasn't thinking of giving up anyway, as he would like to spend the rest of his life contributing in some way with something he considers useful for society and his family. Besides him, since surviving that famous macabre dungeon, Kim also has his concerns about what he can offer to the people he loves, and since then, he has been struggling to support his 2 little daughters in any way he can. His wife insists that this hunter business is very dangerous and that many people have died in these endeavors, but the family man needs to pay for a decent school for his daughters and argues that the association does not send low-rank hunters to dangerous dungeons. That case was a mere exception and won't happen again. That said, his wife calms down and puts her hopes in him. And at that moment, his little daughter asks if daddy is strong. Attentive, Kim replies that he is capable of defeating gigantic monsters, and the child is impressed. In the Hunter Association building inside Master Choi's office, Baek complains that the interview he did was a total waste of time and that he has no intention of boasting on TV like an idiot. Despite this, Choi thinks that the S-rank hunter made a great impression with his poise and deep answers. Not satisfied, Baek accuses that this interview was surely meant for Choi, but was pushed onto him. Choi responds in a cynical manner because this interview required an S-rank hunter, close to President Go and very dedicated to his work, and it really could have been him to do it, maybe. Tired of Choi's antics, Baek asks him straight away what he wants, so the guild master reveals that Yujin Construction is moving its pieces in secret to open its own hunter guild. Baek already knows this because some of his subordinates have reported receiving contract proposals, and so he believes that Choi called him there for a bigger reason than that. So finally, Choi asks a big favor of his colleague. Meanwhile, Lee Jo-hee resurfaces after a long time, so we know she's still withdrawn after the trauma she suffered. Her mother expresses concern for her daughter and tells her over the phone that a B-rank hunter should be strong, but she fears her daughter might not be that type and could just be hindering others, so she wants her daughter to come back home and help with the family store, especially since her father also misses her greatly. Lee gets annoyed by this and tells her mother to stop meddling in her life, so she hangs up and decides to do something to emerge from the shadows and rebuild herself, and as she gets up, she leaves behind her cell phone, which notifies her of a request for a D-rank raid. Back at the association, Cha-ha and Baek greet each other in the hallway, and then Che informs Choi that she was asked to be the master of Yujin Construction Guild, but turned down the offer. Next, she asks what Choi and Baek were talking about before she arrived. In response, Bake recalls their earlier conversation while having whiskey alone about how Jeju Island has been completely ignored by society because it used to be a place of frequent expeditions and missions, but now it's become a forgotten place by everyone. However, Choi never forgot that place, nor what he went through there, and even though he holds an important position and is praised daily as the ultimate weapon of society, nothing frees him from the feeling that he should return to that place. For this reason, Choi has decided to return to Jeju Island soon, but he needs Bake and the others for that. Bak suspects that this is the reason for so many sudden new recruits, but Choi asks his companion if he also has reasons to return to that island. Soon, the images of that day come back to the hunter's mind and he laments for Yeon-seok and Byeon. Meanwhile, in an isolated place, an elderly man pleads with someone that other people need to die. Jinwoo is heading out for a new mission, and his sister complains that even on holidays he doesn't let go of work, unlike before when he would return from the dungeons and stay on ice for a week. Therefore, she believes it's the result of his rigorous training. And Jinwoo confesses that he has managed to live in a more stable manner, so he leaves without even grabbing his things, leaving Jiena puzzled by his actions because he's not going to the corner store. Also heading to work, Cheol observes that he hasn't awakened any physical power, which means his sword is useless against magical monsters. Ironically, the martial arts he has dedicated himself to since forever are useless in a dungeon, ironically. On the way to work, he bumps into Jinwoo, and they both discover they're heading to the same raid. Cheol is startled by the boy's evolution in such a short time, and he's puzzled because he remembers Jinwoo had lost a leg that day, but the boy pretends that his leg had simply come back when he woke up in the hospital. Cheol regrets that there wasn't a decent healer in that dungeon to accompany the boy, but fortunately, a young man like Jinwoo is completely healed. In turn, the protagonist is slightly embarrassed because that man still sees him as a weakling who needs to be cared for, but he humbly thanks him for his concern. Then, as they reach the portal, they realize it's a gathering of the same people who were together on that fateful day. Jovi, a close friend of Jinwoo, and a B-rank healer, along with Kim and Kang. Except for the girl, the other hunters can't even look Jinwoo in the face because they remember well that the boy was left behind in that deadly dungeon, allowing the rest to escape. Jovi is impressed by her friend's surreal transformation being so fit and with his leg recovered, very different from when she visited him in the hospital. Jinwoo is surprised because he didn't know his friend had visited him in those conditions until a car pulls up and 3 prisoners get out who will participate in the expedition along with the others. One of the detainees is already excited to have a hottie on the team this time and asking her to ditch that guy and have fun with them. Jinwoo immediately frowns. Then Kang Taeshik, a Hunter Guild's vigilant, tells the prisoner to shut up because none of the 3 prisoners came out of jail to go sightseeing. Along with him, a guild assistant explains that these handcuffed men will be part of the raid this time because the exodus of local hunters left the association with few remaining options. Cheol rehearses a complaint because he doesn't want to fight alongside criminals, but he has no choice but to accept this condition. These are convicted hunters who came to reduce their sentences, and they will participate in the mission anyway. Nevertheless, the association's supervisor will keep an eye on them all the time, and since he's at B rank, he can handle 3 C rankers without any problems. Still, Jinwoo doesn't think it's a good idea for his friend to take risks on this journey, and asks Jody not to participate in the raid this time, but the healer is determined to enter that portal, so she decides to continue anyway. Thus, the prisoners are released, and the first thing Kang Taeshik says is that they know very well what will happen if any of them try anything different. Then he reassures the rest of the group, stating that the prisoners will be under his supervision, and then asks who will be the leader of the team on this expedition. Cheol steps up for the role, but before that, he asks Jinwoo if he agrees with it. After all, 7 people died under his command that day, and the bitter taste of that shame still haunts Cheol to this day. Moreover, the people who survived were thanks to Jinwoo Sung himself, so he asks for this permission and vows to thank him sincerely for everything he did on that tragic night. However, Jinwoo asks the man to stand up, and when Cheol also asks Kim if he can lead, Kim turns his face and responds that he can do whatever he wants. With everything settled, leadership falls to Cheol, and the supervisor declares the start of the raid, so everyone gathers after all this time to embark together once again on a new mission. Already inside the dungeon, the group effortlessly eliminates all the enemies that appear at the beginning, and the prisoners seem to enjoy the bloodbath they are causing on this mission. However, the standout is Jinwoo Sung, who is frighteningly stronger than he has ever been, attracting the attention of the entire team. After finishing the first fight, Cheol asks the protagonist where he got that dagger, and he just scratches his head, avoiding the answer. Joey points out that he hasn't been injured so far, and facing this news, she jokes that maybe she won't even need to get involved this time. Observing the young man closely, Cheol notices that not only his behavior is different, but also his aura. In the midst of this, the impatient Kang Tashik instructs everyone to proceed with the objective. A bit ahead, they come across a split into 3 paths, so they decide to separate to keep everything in sight. Tashik goes to the right with the criminals, and Jinwoo, using his enhanced perception, discovers that the dungeon boss is on the left side but prefers not to reveal it to make the XP worthwhile. Thus, he invites Chil and Johee to go with him on this path. The remaining members, Kim and Kang, continue down the middle. After some time advancing, the duo faces more goblins, hoping that everything will remain like this until the end of the tunnel. Since the weakest hunter in humanity is present, this is definitely a low-ranked dungeon, according to Kim. However, his companion reminds him that it didn't go that smoothly last time they all met. Speaking of the boy, although he believes he won't be forgiven, Kim commits to apologize to the young man because, despite doing it for his family, he still abandoned his comrades, and that is not the behavior of a valiant hunter. On the right side, Tashik observes the prisoners' thirst for violence, not satisfied with just the goblins they could destroy. He asks the men if they would do the same to these monsters if they were human, and upon hearing that they wouldn't hesitate to repeat the act, the Vigilant is transported to the moment when a family man reports that 3 men abused his daughter, leading her to hang herself, and his wife is hospitalized due to the psychological consequences of this heinous crime. To make matters worse, the criminals are hunters, and this pathetic justice system decided that participating in raids reduces the sentence for demons like them, while his daughter is buried forever 7 feet underground. For all this, the inconsolable father offers 300 million to Tashik to deal with the criminals, and given the mission, the Vigilant intends to lie to the department that the prisoners were ambushed by a horde of goblins. Following their own path, Kim and Kang end up in the central tunnel, where Tashik is fulfilling the family man's wish to make the condemned suffer before death. Seeing the arrival of the 2 hunters, he realizes that the dungeon boss is in the left tunnel, so he finishes the job and decides to change his plans. At that moment, Jinwoo remembers that Tashik once visited the hospital with his superior, so he hopes the Vigilant doesn't recognize him. A bit further, the hunters seize the damage in the central corridor, including Kang dead and Kim barely alive. Johee hurries to treat her companion, and as soon as the healer gives him a second chance at life, Chil notices that those knife cuts in various non-vital points were not made by monsters. Still very weakened, Kim asks his comrades to give up because he won't survive this, but Jinwoo insists that the experienced hunter needs to make an effort to see his daughter again and to continue hating this man. Therefore, Kim uses his last breath to apologize to the boy and then peacefully falls asleep. Lurking in the shadows, Tashik tries to catch everyone off guard by attacking Johee, but Jinwoo saves his friend just in time. The Vigilant would love to take down the healer first to have less trouble, but the boy ruined everything. The team leader questions what the association member thinks he's doing, so the Vigilant explains that he only intended to fake the prisoners' deaths, but now he has changed his mind. He plans to tell the department that the prisoners tried to escape, killed the rest of the team, and then attempted to ambush Tashik, but met the same fate as their eliminated comrades. In response, Chil takes Kim's sword and steps forward for the confrontation, eager to face someone with a sword after a long time. As the opponent is rank B, the leader asks Johee to strengthen his physique and plans to rely on the weak defense that assassins usually have to win the duel. However, Tashik mocks the fact that an old mage without buffs is using a sword, considering that all his abilities are in magic. Chil tries to demonstrate his technique by cutting the enemy in half, but it was just a clone. Jinwoo watches the fight and internally wishes his partner were a bit faster, and the Vigilant acknowledges that the old man has his potential, but proves not to be enough by cutting his shoulder. However, Johee heals her ally once again, and Tashik begins to get fed up with the support his rival is receiving, so he decides to take down the healer first. However, Chil reaches the rival in time and shows that he is not a useless old man because he used to be a teacher of rank as hunters. Still, Tashik knows that an old mage cannot keep up with the pace of an assassin, and with that in mind, he delivers several cuts to the adversary. When Johee tries to revive her companion again, her magic fails. Therefore, Chil was at the mercy of the assassin. But when he was about to suffer the final blow, the mage invokes a fire spell that incinerates the enemy. However, it was another one of Tashik's copies, aware that the wizard would focus on the sword to make the assassin lower his guard against his magic. Thus, the mage realized it was checkmate. But this time, Jinwoo Sung, the weakest hunter in humanity, saves the old man. Tashik asks who this kid is, and he states his name along with his rank. The Vigilant realizes that this guy would never be from the lowest rank because twice he had the reflex to block his attacks. And as he seems to be known by the rest of the group, he probably isn't one of those who use fake ranks because that kind of cheater doesn't leave witnesses behind. Consequently, Tashik realizes he's facing a second awakening, and on top of that, it's that weakling who was hospitalized after the double dungeon even though the mana meter only showed 10. Still, Jinwoo-sung doesn't have much experience as a hunter, so the assassin thinks of using that to his advantage by drawing another dagger. At that moment, the E-rank questions the reason for the vigilant promoting this massacre in the dungeon. Then he explains that he delivered justice by tearing apart 3 abusers of a minor, but Jinwoo saw that he toyed with Kim and Kang until their deaths, avoiding their vital points, so it's evident that justice isn't what motivates this guy. With that said, Taeshik laughs as he remembers refusing the family man's proposal to avenge a defenseless little girl, not for the money offered, but because exterminating humans is much more pleasurable than monsters. Next, the 2 rivals clash in a duel that the spectators could barely keep up with, given the absurd speed both possessed. They have similar physical structure and techniques, but Taeshik relies on his experience and cunning to emerge victorious. Thus, he kicks a handful of sand into the opponent's eyes to land the first stabs. However, the system alerts Jinwoo-sung that a new target is in play, and he must eliminate this aggressor seeking his death, lest he suffer a penalty. Therefore, Jinwoo warns the opponent that the system has now given him another reason to be destroyed. Taeshik has no idea what system this is, and this ignorance challenges his conviction of having control of the fight. Assuming his target moves beside him at an incomparable speed, and upon seeing his face cut, the vigilant feels the poison flowing into his bloodstream. He promises to retaliate with another surprise, then uses his stealth to conceal his body, scent, and sound. No one knows that Taeshik possesses this rare ability because no one has survived to tell, and he uses this technique to strike the target unseen. Desperate, Jinwoo's friends consider intervening, but Taeshik makes it clear he can cut both of them in the blink of an eye. Indeed, he thinks he can do the same to Jinwoo because of the deep cut he made in his leg, but the hunter uses his total recovery to surprise his proud opponent once again, who has no idea how many times the enemy can use this healing magic, as he has never seen a fighter capable of healing before. In turn, Jinwoo loses another emotion, but he believes he won't need to feel anger to eliminate trash like that. Hearing his comment, Taeshik laughs upon discovering that the young man also has blood on his hands, suggesting that they are in the same boat since they have taken the lives of other human beings. After all, after the hunters awaken, the world's rules change to accommodate them, and within a dungeon like this, the only law is that of the strongest. Taeshik disappears again and tries to maintain his strategy, but Jinwoo detects his enemy through his bloodlust. Still, Taeshik remains invisible and plans to keep it as a trump card until Jinwoo activates his assassin's intent and throws his enemy into limbo, then promptly plunges his dagger into his chest. With that, Taeshik is no longer able to fight, and he decides to reveal the cause of so many deaths in this dungeon. According to him, the hunters are killing machines, and it doesn't make sense to expect them to be guided by common morality. So he is about to die now because of the natural selection that eliminates the weak links of evolution. However, as Jinwoo has exhibited an arsenal of unknown abilities, his rival believes he may not even be a hunter, and as he was able to defeat Taeshik, the boy will no longer be able to pretend to be a mere E-rank. Jinwoo reveals that he is capable of evolving with each battle he wins, and Taeshik observes that this young man's shadow extends to very dark places, and the more powerful he becomes, the darker the places his shadow will reach. After all, if you gaze into the abyss for too long, the abyss gazes back at you. With that said, Jinwoo collects the reward of a stealth rune stone while reflecting on what he just heard. Deep down, he acknowledges that he keeps getting stronger and stronger. The stronger he gets, the more something breaks inside him. Still, it's not time to turn back, so he tells his 2 friends to leave the dungeon because the rest will be taken care of by him. Incredulous, the companions watch their friend depart alone until he finally reaches the boss's door. Sometime later, Woo Jinchul, the administrator of the Hunter's surveillance team, is on his way to meet the survivors of this dungeon, lamenting that he never suspected Taeshik's sinister side. Soon he meets Jogi, Cheol, and Jinwoo-sung, the same E-rank hunter from that time, almost unrecognizable. Firstly, he apologizes for what his employee caused them all, but getting straight to the point, the supervisor asks who killed Kang Taeshik. Jinwoo is backed into a corner and realizes he will have to break his contract with Yu. But to his surprise, Cheol takes the blame for the vigilant's death. Jinchul asks how the man being a C rank was able to defeat a B rank, and he responds that it was all thanks to his team's healer, who was also a B rank. Thus, the administrator accepts the version of events and announces that he will need everyone's testimony about the incident. Noticing Jinchul's A rank, the protagonist realizes he wouldn't stand a chance against him at the moment, while the raid leader comments that Jinwoo doesn't need to thank him for the trouble he was spared. 3 hours later, the father who hired Taeshik to kill the prisoners turned himself in, confirming that the survivors acted in self-defense. After this long day, Joey shows Jinwoo a stone and asks if he remembers what it is. A few minutes before that, the two were walking peacefully through the park, and Joey emphasizes how much her friend had changed in this short interval of time. Facing this, Jinwoo believes that each individual responds differently to the events that occur in their life. The healer agrees, but at the same time feels that she is too afraid to be a hunter and to take these transformations to the level that this profession demands. For example, she knows she should be participating in level A, B, or even C raids, but she prefers to stay in lower-ranked dungeons out of convenience or fear of surpassing herself. No matter how hard she tries to change this, she never manages to leave this comfort zone. Still, it was this way that she met Jinwoo Sung, and soon found herself healing the new friend in every moment they ventured together through the country's dungeons. At first, she would get angry seeing her companion getting hurt all the time, but over time she started seeing it differently because Jinwoo always managed to survive regardless of the injury, and his eyes continued to radiate life. After this outburst, Joey shows the stone that her friend had given her on one of these expeditions, determined to retire from the hunter career and return to her parents' home. Jinwoo understands his friend's motivation and accepts the gift back and informs her that he will call her to grab something to eat when he passes by one day. After this farewell, Jinwoo carefully examines Joey's gift while recalling the encounter he had with Jinchul at the exit of the last dungeon. The surveillance administrator was surprised that an E rank could handle a B rank like Kang Tashik, and therefore understands the reason for Jinwoo's second awakening suspicions. But as Uncle Ben would say, with great power comes great responsibility, and the young hunter attracted much attention after Dong-suk's team was decimated in the giant spider dungeon. Therefore, possibly his younger brother Dong-soo will seek answers for his older brother's death. S-rank individuals like him are not easily stopped by the law. They are capable of causing as many miracles as calamities to society, and considering that Dong-soo intends to cause the second option, Jinchul recommends that the boy take his family and flee the country as quickly as possible. However, Jinwoo sees in this threat another motivation to develop himself, because if he fails in this objective, his sister, and his mother will be buried together with the Sung family name. With this in mind, Jinwoo sets out for new missions with Yoo Jinhoo, but seems bothered by the group of drunken and injured people gathered outside to join the raid. Yoo explains that he prioritized qualified people to be hunters, but who cannot work for some reason, or who are having problems passing the selection. But according to the hair, they will only serve to complete the team so they can enter the dungeon with a minimum of 8 participants. Jinwoo observes that there is a child among those summoned, but his colleague explains that it is not against the law to call minors as long as they have awakened. Speaking of the devil, the mentioned girl mentions the lack of manners when referring to her, since she is a qualified hunter, but Jinwoo deflates her by politely reminding her that she is an E rank, with no experience in raids, but that in any case, she will just wait outside with the others. One of the summoned asks if they are really going to earn 3 million each just to wait outside while Yoo and Jinwoo do all the dirty work. The contractor confirms the payment but reminds everyone that they must keep these raids confidential, otherwise, they will have to pay a fine 10 times greater than the payment they will receive as stated in the contract. In the middle of this reminder, Jinwoo uses the stealth rune stone he obtained by defeating Tashik to incorporate the ability. When he turns his back, he was ready to start the mission with his new buff-boosting armor made by a refined Italian manufacturer, but when Jinwoo awkwardly drops the hair to the ground with just one finger, they both agree that this equipment is too heavy for the skinny playboy. With that done, before crossing the portal, Jinwoo comments that his companion forgot to take off his helmet, but the D-rank hunter insists on keeping at least the helm. The mission begins, and some of those summoned from outside are content with the good life they have, being paid to sit and drink, but at the same time, they believe that the 2 young people who enter have no idea what they are getting into. Meanwhile, at school, Jenna wonders if her friend Song-yi skipped class today, but not only did she do that, the girl is also killing time to fulfill the expedition contract, killing 2 birds with 1 stone. The rest of the summoned estimate that the raid should last 2 hours, but after 60 minutes, Yoo comes running back from the portal, making some believe that they deviated from the objective. But when the portal begins to close with Jinwoo Sung's departure, proof that they killed the boss is thrown in everyone's face. The next portal is an hour's drive away, so Yoo calls the rest of the group to finish the quota of 3 raids per day. With a well-established strategy, Jinwoo dealt with the monsters while Yoo mined whatever he could at each portal they crossed. Working day after day, without a break, the 2 leveled up like steps on a staircase, pocketing any threat that came their way. With his new stealth technique, Jinwoo tore through enemies unseen on the battlefields, and the flawless use of this ability granted him a level 2 sprint. Combining his stealth with the newly learned advanced grip and fatal blow, Jinwoo Sung devastated his opponents with the silent elegance of an arrow, all while the rest of the group pocketed 9 million a day without having to lift a single muscle. After another round of intense combat, Yu collected the loot while his companion rested a bit and analyzed the abilities he had been gaining while leveling up in the dungeons. Although useful, Jinwoo doesn't have enough mana to use them for long, so he understands that he should focus more on the intelligence attribute. Besides that, after leveling up so much, he wonders if it's time to climb up to the demon castle, but he doesn't know if he can handle that dungeon alone, considering it must be between B and a rank, according to his own analysis. Until suddenly, a system notification announces that Jinwoo has reached the level required to request a class change, provided he completes a mission for it. However, all this success began to attract the attention of important people, and the manager An Sangmin, from a multi-million-dollar company, found out through his subordinate Kichul that the youngest son of the owner of Yujin Construction is spending more than double the market value on C-rank portals, wanting to pay 150 million for the rights to dungeons of this rank. The manager believes that this could put the boy's father's company in the red, and that it's too much money for a daddy's boy to be playing hunter. However, Sangmin discovers that the boy is not alone in this scheme, and that Jinwoo Sung participates in all formations of these raids. As the manager well remembers, this Jinwoo guy was involved in the double dungeon incident, so he feels that something is wrong there. While the heat isn't on yet, the two hunters continue to do their job normally and return earlier and earlier from the portals they invade. The outsiders are getting so bored that one of them asks to drive the van just to feel useful in some way, while Jinwoo suspects that the girl in the group isn't as satisfied as the others in this whole story. Besides her, manager Sangmin is definitely bothered by the hypothesis that Jinwoo Sung has undergone a second awakening, considering that he was present in 3 serious incidents and survived them all. The first was the double dungeon, the second was the extermination of the Dongsuk squad, and the third involved the murder of vigilant Kang Tashik. In all these events, there were several deaths, but Jinwoo survived all 3 occasions, so Sangmin believes it's a case of a reawakening. Listening carefully to every word, Kichul asks what the boss will do after reaching this conclusion, and he announces that it's time to recruit a promising rookie. Arriving at the dungeon where the two hunters are, Sangmin sees a relaxed picnic in front of the portal, until Songye arrives and warns that it's forbidden to enter there. The two men try to extract information without being invasive, and ask if the girl is part of the attacking team on duty. When she confirms, Sangmin presumes that Jinwoo Sung left the rest of the group behind to face the dungeon alone, and therefore his interest grows upon sensing the boy's extraordinary potential. Satisfied with the information, the manager leaves with his subordinate, and at that moment the two invaders finish the job in the dungeon. Jinwoo wants to know about tomorrow's schedule because he would like to take a day off. Since he remembered he has a commitment, so he postpones the raids for another day and moves on to today's next one. Eavesdropping on the conversation, we see that the young ones have already started to attract problems close by, and then we are faced with a chaotic nightmare that Master Choi often has, involving infernal fire, demons, and events from Jeju Island. Haunted by his trauma, the leader of the Hunters Guild is content to know that a new reconnaissance mission is about to take place in that cursed place. In the meantime, Jinchul is dropped off near his home after another day of work, until Sangmin and Kichul approach the young man. The higher-ranking man introduces himself as An Sangmin, manager of the second administration team of the White Tiger Guild, and asks for a minute to talk to Jinwoo. Getting straight to the point, he wants to hire the promising hunter for double what Yujin Construction is paying, and if he has more demands, the manager commits to chasing after them. Sangmin is convinced that such a young man will accept an offer of this caliber, but instead of showing excitement, Jinwoo asks how much the man's guild building is worth. Not quite understanding, the manager calculates that it must be around 50 billion, so the hunter dismisses the offer because, showing the documents proving Yujin Construction's offer, he shows that he was offered a building with a market value of 50 billion, and since the White Tiger Guild committed to paying double, Jinwoo understands that at least the White Tiger Guild headquarters should be transferred to his name. The manager is left speechless because he doesn't even have the authority to offer a deal of that magnitude, so Jinwoo stands up and makes it clear that he knows he's being spied on. As a cut suddenly appears on the man's face, An Sangmin understands the reason for the construction company's offer, because a reawaken with stealth technique is worth gold. Then the manager justifies to the invisible aggressor that the dungeon market is very scarce, and by researching who bought so many C-rank portals, he came across the name Jinwoo. That said, as only he and his subordinate know this, Jinwoo asks them to keep it a secret, otherwise, they will be the first on the suspect list. As Sangmin agrees, the promising young man sits back down and laments monopolizing the C-rank portals, but warns that he needs to keep doing this for some time. However, he offers 3 portals for 300 million each, otherwise the White Tiger will be a long time without training its hunters of this rank. Indignant, Sangmin mentions that the mana and essence stones of each portal are worth 200 million at most, But before asking Jinwoo to lower the price, the hunter himself agrees to sell the 3 portals for 600 million in total. After closing the deal, Jinwoo wants the money deposited by the end of the day, and then asks the manager to close his eyes and open his mouth to receive a gift. Then he pours a red liquid that heals the wound on the man's face and reminds him to keep his mouth shut. As the hunter leaves, Kitchell asks if the contract went through, and Sangmin replies that for sure that young man is worth much more than they thought. The next day, the protagonist receives a message from Yu confirming that the 600 million has been deposited into the account, and when his companion asks how he managed to sell the portals at this inflated value, Jinwoo replies that it's a business secret. In the meantime, Sangmin discovers that the boy outsmarted him because there were other C-rank portals being sold for around 70 million within the jurisdiction of the White Tiger Guild, and at that moment, Jinwoo sends a message saying that now they are even, and therefore he will forget that he was being spied on. With that, the manager recognizes that it's 1-0 for the hunter, but is relieved to have paid the price for espionage and at least to have obtained Jinwoo Sung's number, which would be enough for the moment. Meanwhile, the talented hunter drives to his class exchange mission. Far away from the city, he gears up to face this mission that appeared after he leveled up to 40 in the last raid. Jinwoo has already found 2 accessible dungeons with only special items, and the 2 he completed out of obligation were the penalty and emergency ones. This time, it seems to be optional, so the hunter has time to ponder whether he wants to do it or not. At the same time, the fact that he has time to choose makes him imagine that this mission is quite difficult, but in any case, it's definitely an important step to establish a class and get stronger, so he accepts it and a huge portal opens in front of him. Since Jinwoo hasn't done his daily training yet, he'll have to do it when he returns, but the excitement from the portal in front of him indicates that the game has finally begun for real. As soon as he enters, a warrior in red armor awaits the hero inside. Meanwhile, Yu waits with his father for the other participant of a meeting, until Jin Sung, Yu's older brother, shows up. Jinwoo Sung advances through the dungeon and doesn't see anything different about it, but the system warns that potions and access to the store are blocked, and it's not possible to recover status when leveling up. Therefore, Jinwoo knows he needs to be extremely cautious, keeping in mind that he can't leave the dungeon until he completes it. At that moment, an enemy knight approaches and attacks the hunter, who draws his dagger and strikes the target swiftly, but the powerful armor he wears prevents any damage. Jinwoo doesn't have the same equipment, so he needs to be careful not to suffer a blow from a sword of that size. He dodges the attacks and prepares his fatal blow to knock down the opponent, but even this ability isn't able to pierce the armor. Then Jinwoo remembers facing enemies with an even tougher shell than this one, so he tears off the knight's head with his bare hands. The boy regrets wasting a fatal blow in vain, as he can't recover mana, but the other knights approaching seem unconcerned about that. Back at the meeting, Yu's father questions the boy for not even touching the food yet, but Yu says it's nothing. Then the construction company president turns to his eldest son and asks about the progress of the guild creation, as all the S-rank hunters have rejected the proposal to join the clan. Jin Sung explains that indeed Cha Ha and Min Byung rejected the invitation, but that's not a problem because he's also in contact with hunters from Europe and the Middle East. If the construction company meets their demands, they will surely sign up, and this will be a similar case to Wang Dongsu's. Next, Jin Sung tells his brother that he knows he's working in secret, paying a high price for the rights to rank C raids as a way to carve out his space, but above all, you shouldn't get in his way. The young man is embarrassed by the reprimand but relieved that they don't know he's accompanied by an extraordinary hunter. And this hunter is expending so much energy in his fights that he feels he needs a break. But at the last minute, he discovers an invisible enemy through stealth and dispatches it. Jinwoo is impressed to have to face monsters with this ability, and to make matters worse, a mage attacks him from afar. Faced with this, Jinwoo tries to analyze what's happening and notices that the armor resembles Kasaka's, giving the impression that he's revisiting old battles. The variety of enemies is great, but it's necessary to discover each one's weakness to have any chance. Knights need strength, assassins need perception, archers need agility. If Jinwoo doesn't put strength into his blow, a knight won't even feel it, and without perception, he can't identify the stealthy ones, but the worst problem is the mages. Since the hunter never invested in intelligence, he'll have trouble defeating them because he needs to conserve the little mana he has apart from his abilities. Speaking of which, the system indicates that his fatigue is increasing more and more, so the boy needs to end this soon. Meanwhile, Master Choi meets with a group of hunters because according to him, the time has finally come. Rummaging through the loot, Jinwoo obtains a high-rank knight's breastplate, and since he never paid much attention to his equipment, he gives the armor a chance. Fortunately, it becomes invisible on his body, so Jinwoo won't stand out, and furthermore, this equipment hardly restricts his movements. Besides this item, a guardian's necklace and a knight's gauntlet are also in his inventory, And since Jinwoo feels he's leveled up, all that's left is to recover a little more from fatigue and move on to the next stage of the dungeon. After resting, he comes across a gigantic door and presumes that some big problem must be behind it, but as it's the only way, he has to go through it. So Jinwoo opens the door and feels a strong wind that gives him chills, but he advances until he enters a throne room, where the Red Knight is. Jinwoo begins to feel the same pressure he felt in the double dungeon, and all this intensity comes from Commander Igris, the Blood Red Knight. The name above the enemy is Dark Red, giving certainty that his level is far above Jinwoo's. Defending an empty throne, the commander quickly advances towards the hunter, and as he strikes with his sword, he cuts a pillar as if it were a twig. The exceptional strength and speed of the Blood Red Knight are unstoppable, and the agility he maintains even with the heavy armor proves it. Jinwoo tries to find a combat strategy, but the enemy's swiftness is suffocating. Until at one point, Jinwoo finds an opening to attack, and after much difficulty, manages to land his first blow on the rival, but nothing happens. In response, the commander strikes forcefully with his sword, and even though Jinwoo manages to defend himself with the dagger, he's thrown away. At least he noticed that both their speeds are equal, despite the knight being much stronger. Since the dagger doesn't penetrate that armor, the boy needs to find some way to face this monster, so he decides to discard his dagger and fight unarmed. Following the knight's code of honor, his opponent also disarms himself. Meanwhile, Director Go and Woo Jinchul stay late at work sorting out pending matters, and the surveillance team administrator warns that the moment is approaching. The director agrees and takes a call from Choi, who thanks Go for approving the operation. In turn, Go argues that in reality, this tragedy is still fresh in people's minds, making it easier for public opinion to support this kind of mission. Next, Choi asks if the director is aware that he's stirring up a hornet's nest, but Go is ready to shoulder this burden. Finally, Choi comments that the third raid on Jeju Island never left his mind. On the other hand, the fight between Jinwoo and the Red Knight seems about to end because even unarmed, the commander is still extremely powerful. After throwing the hunter against the wall, the knight unleashes so many consecutive punches that they bury the boy into the wall, with the last one nearly collapsing the entire structure. Jinwoo manages to dodge the final punch, but even though he defended against all the others, he feels like he lost about 500 HP. Thus, the best choice of his life was putting on the armor, because otherwise his luck wouldn't have been the same. Nonetheless, the knight manages to inflict significant damage even without his sword, so all that's left for Jinwoo is to try to outpace the opponent in speed. He then utilizes his sprint ability and charges towards the commander, but even though he's incredibly fast, he can't land a single hit. On the contrary, it's the knight who continues to strike Jinwoo whenever he desires. However, the passive ability of willpower is activated in the hunter, further increasing his speed. Nevertheless, he still falls victim to the opponent's powerful blows until he finally manages to rise again and test the boost in his agility. After an intense exchange of blows, all defended by Igris, Jinwoo lands a kick on the enemy, who becomes enraged upon suffering damage for the first time and uses that fury to pummel Jinwoo even more. The boy seems surrendered to this insane frenzy of the Blood Red Knight. After enduring this unstoppable sequence of attacks, Jinwoo ends up sitting on the throne exhausted. While her brother is on the brink of death, Jaina prepares some sandwiches for him and leaves a note informing him that dinner is in the fridge. Then she eats her portion of the sandwiches while studying, intending to visit her mother in the hospital afterward. With Jinwoo resigned to his fate, Igris retrieves his sword and tries to deliver the finishing blow, but the hunter shows that he hasn't been defeated yet by managing to hold the sword with his hand and then piercing the enemy's eye with his dagger, causing darkened blood to flow from the monster. Expending his last ounce of strength and rallying against his own refusal to die, Jinwoo drags the knight across the hall until he smashes him against the wall. Igris pulls the dagger from his eye to retaliate, but Jinwoo retrieves the weapon back into his inventory and promptly thrusts it beneath the creature's chin. As it still isn't enough, the hunter uses his fatal blow to deliver the most potent attack he can, finally defeating Igris, the Blood Red Knight commander. After the fight, Jinwoo's song reflects that his victory was pure luck because the enemy was vastly superior in every way and a small mistake would have been fatal. With Igris' defeat, the hunter secures 4 rewards: a bag with 1.5 million gold, Igris' helmet, his first S-rank equipment, which reduces damage suffered by the wearer by 15% and increases strength and vitality by 20 points. Thirdly, he obtains the rune stone for the Dominator's touch, but since it doesn't specify the ability he would gain upon breaking the stone, he leaves the item for later. Lastly, he checks the instant teleportation stone, a stone that takes him out of the dungeon but cannot be stored in the inventory and will be automatically destroyed once the class change mission ends. In other words, Jinwoo realizes that this mission isn't over yet, And when several portals appear around him, the system warns him to survive as long as possible to accumulate points to reach the highest class possible. Jinwoo becomes worried about the number of portals, but he is relieved to see that they aren't monsters of Igris's level, even though there are many of them at once. At this moment, the hunter's helicopter heads towards Jeju Island. Jinwoo Sung eliminates the enemy knights one by one, but the portals continue to release more onto the battlefield. Needing to spend as much time as possible without dying, Jinwoo uses his stealth to pass the time without being seen. He notes that it costs 200 mana to activate and an additional point for every second of use, with him having 190 mana. However, a mage disables this ability of the hunter, along with the assassin's intent, so Jinwoo is exposed again and ends up taking a sword blow to the back. After kicking the assailant, he realizes he only lasted 5 minutes and feels he can't endure anymore, so he grabs the instant teleportation stone to escape. But a knight lands a hammer blow on his arm, causing the stone to fall, leaving the protagonist alone facing dozens of enemy knights. Jinwoo needs to find the stone to get out of there, but with all those enemies around, it's impossible. Therefore, he thinks the only way out is by defeating everyone. However, with each passing moment, with less vitality and without the assassin's intent and stealth, Jinwoo knows well that he won't last much longer. Still, that doesn't mean he'll give up. Even with almost no HP and mana left, the hunter promises to survive and goes after his opponents. After all, Jinwoo Sung knows better than anyone what it's like to be at the bottom, and now is not the time for him to give up everything he's achieved to help his family, even if his fists are already raw. Suddenly, he hears muffled voices in the background of hunters commenting on how Jinwoo is the weakest hunter in humanity, just needing an E-rank dungeon to send him to the hospital for days. These words trigger something in the young man, hindering his reaction power in the fight. His mind projects Chil and Jo-hee saying it's enough, that he doesn't need to try so hard anymore. Behind him, the old Jinwoo blames the current one for insisting on something so dangerous, saying he should be satisfied for leaving the E-rank and getting this far. Meanwhile, President Go talks with Jinchul about the third raid on Jeju Island, confessing that his body wasn't fit for combat at that time, so he wasn't there. On the other hand, the surveillance administrator acted as security on the perimeter as a point of contact. Many lost their lives there, and those who survived still carry mental scars as consequences. According to Go, all hunters have their own scars, and it's their duty to overcome that pain, otherwise, destruction awaits them. Old Jinwoo Sung, observing the new one, notices how he has grown taller and more muscular, but that this difference is only on the outside. Inside, Jinwoo is still weak, so much so that once again he's on the verge of death. At this moment, the hunter takes another sword blow and is thrown away while defending himself. His older version belittles Jinwoo as an eternal E-rank hunter, nothing more, just a dreamer who hasn't learned his place in the world. Jinwoo backs away from the taunts, but soon is severely hit by a huge knight who smashes his forehead into the ground. Almost closing his eyes, he hears his old self saying he'll die because of this arrogance of thinking he was already prepared. Looking around, Jinwoo Sung wonders if this occasion isn't a repeat of the double dungeon and tries to remember what happened after that. At that moment, his system warns him that he's about to suffer the penalty for not completing his daily exercise mission, so he realizes that luck is also an ability. His older version comments that the system doesn't want him to die yet, apparently, and bids farewell. Thus, at the moment when Jinwoo would be hit by an enemy sword, he is transferred to the penalty zone. Once there and almost too weak to stand up, the hunter thanks the heavens for being saved by the bell, while reviewing the mission from which he escaped. The system wished luck to the participants, and Jinwoo wonders if it's because the mission is almost impossible or if the system is rooting for him and wants to keep him alive. Next, he opens the store to alleviate his exhaustion, which had exceeded 90, a critical situation he had never seen before. After taking several potions to recover from fatigue, he tries to do the same with his HP, but the potion he bought for that purpose doesn't work when he's severely injured, so he has to wait to heal naturally or try to level up to recover hit points. Speaking of which, he needs to quickly decide what to do, since several giant desert centipedes have appeared in front of him. Soon he realizes he needs to survive for 4 minutes, so he cautiously dives into the creatures, always keeping in mind that what doesn't kill him strengthens him. During Jinwoo's fight, his sister wakes up from a strange dream and sees that the boy hasn't returned home yet, so she imagines he might have found a girlfriend, but then she dismisses the idea herself. Finally, she remembers she warned him there would be a parents' and teachers' meeting, so she wishes her brother would come back soon. Back to the hunter, he exterminates all the centipedes and levels up several times, thus being able to recover completely. Since he still has 10 minutes left to return, he takes a look at the store and finds an assassin's sword of knights, which gives a 25% damage bonus against armor-type monsters, so he decides to buy it, even though it costs an arm and a leg. Moreover, he checks his runic stone that he won by defeating Igris, and by breaking it to incorporate the ability, he gains the touch of the Dominator, which allows the user to manipulate objects physically without touching them and without spending mana to use it. Considering this ability, Jinwoo remembers that it's exactly what the Blood Red Knight did, but when he tries to start with a giant centipede, he discovers he's still not able to lift very large objects. Having done that, he waits for the countdown to reach 0 and returns to the Eye of the Storm with his new powers. At the same time, the hunters summoned to Jeju Island approach the mission site, and Choi laments that Chaha has to go through that traumatic place again. She reassures the leader, saying she wasn't a hunter during the 3rd raid, but still she understands how the guild master must feel. Then the copilot detects several sources of mana in the water and puts it on the screen for the superiors to see. Back to Jinwoo, the sword he bought is definitely doing the job, so the hunter feels more confident in his return to this mission. Still, he feels a very strange sensation because more and more knights keep coming and his level doesn't rise there. That's when the boy focuses his attention on the battlefield mages because they keep casting support spells and hiding. Soon he realizes that it's the mages who summon the portals from which the knights come out. For this reason, Jinwoo eliminates the first mage in sight, with 5 more left in battle. Focusing on these support targets, he floats through the battlefield while piling up the knights that get in his way. After defeating another wizard, the 3 remaining join forces to invoke a spell that gathers the dead knights and transforms them all into a gigantic golem. However, Jinwoo doesn't hold back and swiftly acts against the new adversary, scaling its body to cut the chains of a chandelier hanging from the ceiling so that it falls onto the monster. Despite this creature seeming extremely strong in Jinwoo's mind, having fewer enemies in the game cleared the path for him to hunt down the wizards, and that's exactly what he does by eliminating the 3 in a single strike. However, even with the conjurers down, the golem still stood and continued to attack the hunter, so he had no choice but to devastate the last enemy with his own powers, which opened a hole in the golem's torso and brought down part of the entire structure around it. Following this, the system announces Jinwoo Sung's victory, and considering that the class to which he would belong depended on his performance, the system analyzes the hunter's mission result and sends an enigmatic notification about the player's thirst for power, summoning the spirits of the Death Valley to fight alongside him. Finally, the system announces that Jinwoo Sung's new class is that of a necromancer, and he despairs because he never focused his skill points on intelligence. As he well knows, necromancers are a class of wizards who, among other things, summon undead as servants. However, his composition is that of an assassin, focused on close-range combat, and his most evolved attribute is strength, so everything he has achieved so far goes to waste with this new class. Nevertheless, the system offers him the chance to refuse this change, and that's exactly what he does without a second thought. Still, the system informs him that Necromancer is a secret class and asks once again if Jinwoo is sure of his decision. Seeing that the matter was more serious than he thought, the hunter becomes suspicious and takes a moment to think about what he will do. Apparently, necromancers must have some special ability that common classes don't have, and analyzing the wizards he defeated in this last mission, Jinwoo remembers that they control the knights. Furthermore, Jinwoo has the feeling that he was reliving old missions, and therefore begins to consider that this class was planned for him from the beginning, making things more interesting if the system happened to have thought of that. Above all, nothing prevents a necromancer from fighting on the front lines, so Jinwoo won't necessarily have to stay in the rear, and he'll still be able to use the Shadow Army to level up with him in battles and accumulate XP quickly, so he accepts the class change. Still at work as the sun rises, Jinchul comments that the hunters must already be near Jeju Island by now and Go, in turn, apologizes for keeping his subordinate in the company until this hour, but asks to talk to him about something important. After becoming a necromancer, Jinwoo is notified that depending on the points earned, he can reach a higher class than his current one. And as he achieved all the bonus targets in this mission, he gained points exceeding the maximum allowed by the class, automatically evolving into a Shadow Monarch in the same mission. Now his necromancer senses identify moans coming from within the dead knights as if they were their suffering souls, and he gains the Shadow Extraction ability. To activate this spell, Jinwoo chooses the word Rise as the command word, and as soon as he repeats this command, the shadow of each present knight rises and approaches its master. Excited about his new power, the hunter is notified that besides this extraction magic, his other unique ability is Shadow Storage. The first allows him to drain mana to create shadow soldiers, and the second allows him to store these shadows to summon them later wherever he wants. However, extraction can fail depending on the target's strength or the time since its death, but it's still possible to extract the shadow of an AORS ranked target, and the strength of that shadow reflects the same power it had in life. Obviously, Jinwoo tries to summon Igris back, but before that, he releases 11 infantry shadows because there's a limit to the shadows he can store. Then he recites the command word and a powerful magical wave emanates from the commander's body, but the extraction technique fails. At that moment, he is informed that there are still 2 chances left, so Jinwoo takes a deep breath and orders the blood-red knight to rise once again, only to lose another attempt. At the same time, Go tells Jinchul that the only way for a hunter to increase his strength is by having a second awakening, so it's necessary to train combat skills and find the right allies. Jinwoo tries to uncover clues before using his last chance and soon sees that Igris awaited the return of his king, even though he didn't know if he would ever come back. Therefore, before trying for the 3rd time, he questions whether the commander really wants to rot in that damp place waiting for a king who will never return, instead of maintaining his honor and having one more chance to eliminate the enemies serving the man before him. Thus, as Igris finally rises, Go creates expectations that a new second awakening could happen at any moment, creating someone strong enough to become a new beacon of hope. That said, the Shadow Army and its commander kneeled for their master, and Jinwoo Sung feels genuine pleasure in realizing what he holds in his hands. The protagonist, Jinwoo Sung, receives a call from his sister, Jaina. She complains that he's still sleeping even though it's already 2:13 p.m. and today is their meeting with the teacher. Consequently, Jinwoo hurries out of bed and shows up at Jaina's school, and she can hardly believe that this is really her brother. In response, he asks if he looks odd. She replies that she wouldn't use that word, while Jinwoo explains that he couldn't meet with the teacher wearing sweatpants. It's not just Jaina who notices a change in him. All the girls around can't take their eyes off him as he attracts admiring glances wherever he goes. Seeing her brother winning hearts at school, Jaina asks if he wants her to introduce him to someone, but Jinwoo pinches her cheek and tells her to chill out. At the meeting with the teacher, she shares that Jaina is an excellent student with great grades. She sets an example for other students, and the teacher enjoys teaching her. Jaina has performed well in mock exams and has enough grades to enter any medical school. However, the teacher asks Jinwoo not to pressure his sister more than necessary. Besides that, the teacher has another matter to discuss. She wants to know if Jinwoo, as the older brother, would allow his sister to become a hunter if she were to awaken. Jinwoo answers without ceremony that he would not, and the teacher had expected that response. He asks why, and she admits that it's a lot to ask, but there's something she'd like him to do. Then he unexpectedly visits Han Song-yi and shows her a photo of Gina, asking if she knows this girl. Startled to discover that Jinwoo is Gina's brother, Song makes it clear that, although she doesn't know what the teacher said, she won't stop hunting to return to school. Jinwoo reminds her that she's rank E and won't be able to make a living from it. Although she made some money in his team, it was an exceptional case. Song doesn't want a lecture and retorts, reminding him that he is also rank E. However, he explains that he didn't come to ask her to stop hunting, but to invite her somewhere else. Next, we go to Woo Jinchul, who is waiting at the airport for the arrival of Hwang Dong-soo, brother of Dong-suk. Jinchul welcomes the hunter back, but Dong-soo makes it clear that this dump isn't his home. Nonetheless, he's surprised that a manager from the Hunters Association came to greet him personally. The manager asks how long he'll stay, and he answers that he needn't worry as he doesn't like this country enough to stay long. Jinchul wants to know if the guy came all the way here just to meet those two, but Dong-soo doesn't want the manager questioning things he already knows the answer to. Besides, it's fine if the surveillance team pretends not to know what he intends to do with those two inside a dungeon. First with rank E, then with rank D as he radiates his strength around his body. Dong-soo asks if Jinchul is dumb enough to try to stop him. Meanwhile, Choi Jong-in informs the president of the association, Go Gunny, that some monsters can now fly, albeit short distances for now. Either way, the future capabilities of these monsters are unknown. Go announces that he will arrange an investigation into the matter. When night falls, Jinwoo goes to a portal and introduces himself to manager An and Hyun. Delighted by the young man's arrival, they hadn't expected Jinwoo to get in touch again. Song-yi appears alongside him, and he apologizes for the inconvenience, but An makes it clear that a request from Hunter Sung is in order, while Hyun asks if the training is for this girl. Jinwoo replies affirmatively, then An explains that they've come in a good time as this area has been designated as a high-frequency portal zone, and a rank C portal opened this morning. At that moment, a man approaches and asks if the guys will take long, reminding them that they aren't here for a stroll. Jinwoo asks who he is, and An introduces him as Kim Chul, a rank A tank, and that he is included in this training excursion for younger hunters as the leader of the attack team. Annoyed, Kim Chul grumbles to himself that he will have to take care of a bunch of rank E hunters, while An mentions that the attack team will consist of 1 rank A, 5 rank B, and 2 rank C. With Jinwoo and Han Song-yi's arrival, there are 10 hunters in total. Jinwoo hopes the girl will back out upon seeing how brutal the raids can be, but they've made an excellent lineup for the group. If they succeed too easily, it will compromise his objective. Ken approaches and asks the protagonist to limit his participation to give space for the rookies to show their skills, and he assures that he will do so. Thus, the expedition begins and the participants enter the portal. However, as soon as he steps into the dungeon, Jinwoo is struck by a strange feeling. Suddenly, the portal reacts unexpectedly, so he grabs Song-yi and tries to pull her out. As he struggles with only his head outside, he asks Manager An to bring the main attack team as quickly as possible. Having said that, he is pulled back in. Without delay, Baek Yoon-ho receives a call and can't believe that a rank C portal has turned red. Nonetheless, he is heading there right now. Inside the portal, Jinwoo opens his eyes and finds himself in the middle of a forest surrounded by snow. Everyone wonders where they have ended up, while Kim Chul explains that this is a red portal. Song-yi asks Jinwoo what this means, and he explains that unlike common portals, when you pass through a red portal, you are taken to a dungeon isolated from the outside world. Until the boss is defeated or a dungeon break occurs, there's no way out and no one from outside can help. Moreover, the monsters are stronger in such situations. With that said, an ice arrow hits directly in the face of a hunter, who falls to the ground lifeless. Another arrow is shot towards Song-yi, but Jinwoo manages to catch it in the air and saves her life. Around them, ice elves were positioned in the trees. Jinwoo notes that the elves targeted the two weakest members of the group. When the elves leave, Song asks what those creatures were and his friend explains that they are ice elves. However, due to their malevolent nature, the hunters refer to them by a name more fitting for demons, Ice Slayers. At that moment, Kim Chul captures everyone's attention and warns that they will face enemies ranked B or higher, and without any support. For this reason, the survival of each hunter present depends on following the highest ranked comrade's orders. Having said that, Kim admits that even he cannot defeat these monsters alone, so he decides to form a second group to increase their chances of survival. However, instead of forming balanced teams, the A-rank hunter forms a clique, selecting the best members for himself and leaving those ranked C and below in the other team. According to him, for every day they spend inside the red portal, only an hour passes outside. Meaning, whether they are there to kill the boss or for a dungeon break, the survivors can only leave after many months, too long to be burdened with dead weight. Yet despite the fearful expressions of the weaker hunters, Kim Chul doesn't want them to feel this way. After all, if they just survive until the boss is defeated, everyone will safely return home. At the end of the speech, a girl volunteers to join the weaker group and the leader grants permission, though he thinks her foolish for pitying them. Approaching Jinwoo, the woman points out that Kim hadn't even noticed the arrows arriving, unlike Jinwoo, who certainly isn't rank E as he claims. Finally, Kim Chul announces that he will follow the cleared path, so Jinwoo-san decides to take the route into the forest. Along the way, Kim shows his teammates the claw marks of an ice bear on a tree, admitting they are practically sacrificing the E-rank group. A member highlights that they probably haven't even had training, and that it's terrible luck to come on a raid just to be killed. Hearing this, Kim remembers that the other team has a C-rank and Park Hee-jin, who is B-rank. Nonetheless, he just assumed that the E-rank guy was the leader. Amidst this, everyone hears the sound of a bear and prepares for battle. Soon after, the gigantic creature appears, leaving everyone stunned by its size, except for Kim Chul, who orders everyone to focus on surviving. In response, the bear attacks the team leader, who raises his shield and causes the animal's claws to break in half. With his axe, Kim does the same, but this time with the entire body of the wild ice beast. However, two more bears nearby attack the group. Meanwhile, in the other team, Hee-jin asks her colleagues to stop because the tree markings indicate this territory belongs to the ice bears, and they should return before the animals appear. However, Jinwoo explains that this is precisely why he chose this path. If the territory belongs to the bears, they only need to worry about these animals, which is better than facing intelligent enemies like the elves. Changing the subject, the team leader takes a coat out of his inventory for each member and stares into the forest. Anxious, Song-yi asks what he's seeing, to which he promises to keep her safe, as he was the one who brought her along, but asks the girl not to ask questions. He extends this request to the other two team members, asking them not to question or request anything from him. At that moment, an ice bear encounters the humans. For this reason, Jinwoo changes his title to Wolf Slayer. Meanwhile, outside the portal, Baek concludes that there's no way to open this thing and everything depends on Hunter Kim. On reports that Jinwoo-sung is accompanying the attack team, but when Bark asks about the level of this hunter, the manager lowers his head and reveals that he is rank E, but there is suspicion that this guy has gone through his second awakening. In the meantime, Dong-soo arrives and notes that if the big shots of the White Tiger Guild are there must be an A-rank portal at stake. Now, what he doesn't understand is why a rank E trash entered this portal, which belongs to the White Tiger. Regrettably, it seems that Jinwoo got involved in this mess just when Dong-soo was after him. At least, according to Dong-soo himself, Jinwoo is likely to become monster fodder inside. Speaking of which, the protagonist has just eliminated the last bear among the several that attacked his group. With this, he levels up and celebrates the fact that this red portal gives much more XP than usual. Startled, Heejin asks who this guy is. At night, they eat the meat of the bears they killed. Amidst a conversation by the campfire, Song-ye finds it bizarre that Jinwoo goes to exercise even after fighting that way. Far away, Jinwoo goes to the bear's den and summons Commander Knight Igris, the Blood Red, along with his subordinate warriors. The bears leave the den to defend their home and engage in a bloody battle against the specters. Observing this army in action for the first time, Jinwoo notes that the artillery has high firepower and the infantry regenerates quickly, but consumes a lot of mana. At this point, the leader of the bears shows up and eliminates all the shadow soldiers that were summoned, reducing Jinwoo's mana points to 0. Consequently, he orders Igris to advance. As the Blood Red takes a few steps forward, the bear charges at the knight with all its weight. However, Igris dodges the blow and even tears off part of the enemy's shoulder, leaving it even more furious. Nevertheless, the Dark Spectre is extremely fast and strikes the bear several times, bringing it to its knees and all bloodied. Still, the beast tries to use one last move, forcing the knight to cut its head off and end the fight. Meanwhile, in the other team, an arrow hits another companion of Kim Chul. Even facing the Ice Elves and at a great disadvantage, he declares that he will join the elite of the White Tiger Guild. However, when he sees an elf up close ending the life of a companion, the man runs desperately into the forest. Returning to Jinwoo Sung, he commands the dead bears to awaken. Then shadows emerge from the corpses of the animals, ready to serve the man with all their ferocity. Outside the red portal, the onlookers discuss that 3 hours have passed, equivalent to 3 days on the inside. Bak summarily recalls that the environment inside a red portal is merciless. Then Dong-soo imagines that Jinwoo must be dead and walks toward his car to leave. However, halfway there, he remembers that this boy is not from the White Tiger Guild, and thus wants to know why he was on the attack team. Concerned about the situation, On explains that Jinwoo Sung is an acquaintance of his and wanted to observe a C-rank raid, so he ended up joining in. With that said, Dong-soo grabs the association manager by the throat and demands to know what treasure he's uncovered this time, since he always had a knack for sniffing out interesting news. However, Baek grabs Dong-soo's arm and tells him to release his colleague. After letting go of On, Dong-soo remarks that Baek only thinks he's a big fish because this country is a little pond. Upon hearing this, Baek awakens his power and triggers a vast and powerful wave of energy. On moves away as best he can, fearing that if no one intervenes, an S-rank fight will break out right there. Sure enough, Dong-soo reacts and the two clash, causing an explosion at the site. In the meantime, Kim Chul walks through the forest after escaping the elves, freezing cold and imagining that his group could have won if they had the proper equipment. Further ahead, he reaches the bear den and discovers that they are all dead, unable to believe that the E-rank team could have done this. Therefore, he deduces that it was the Ice Elves and starts running again. Back at the S-rank duel, Jinchul intervenes just in time and prevents the two rivals from colliding directly. Afterwards, he confesses that he does not understand Dong-soo's interest in Jinwoo, but he personally assessed the young man 2 months ago, and Hunter Sung remains E-rank without a doubt. Regarding Hwang Dong-suk, Dong-soo's brother, he was killed in combat against a magical monster, according to the surveillance team's conclusion. Dong-soo laughs and replies that this is the story the association tells the public, while the real culprit behind his brother's death is that playboy from Yujin Construction. If Dong-soo believes so, Jinchul asks why he's after Jinwoo Sung, and the businessman replies that it's just an excuse to kill the kid. However, Dong-soo receives a message on his cell phone and comments that Jinwoo is lucky today. Inside the red portal, Kim Chul encounters the E-rank group and is enraged by the fact that they are still alive and even have cold weather gear like coats, tents, and even food. Overcome with anger, he approaches the group and yells that his entire team was eliminated because they lacked equipment and supplies. In other words, these weaklings were hiding these crucial resources and led his companions to their deaths. First, Kim focuses his gaze on Heejin, who is the highest-ranking member of the team, and says he will count to 3 and wants to hear a confession. With that, he starts counting and draws his sword. At that moment, Jinwoo Sung appears and sends the A-rank tank flying away, mocking the fact that he is blaming others for the death of his companions. Then the E-rank hunter orders the Ice Elves to stop using stealth because their aura is too strong to go unnoticed. Consequently, the Ice Killers abandon their invisibility. Their leader is surprised that some human worms have fared well in this hostile forest. When Jinwoo responds, he realizes he can understand the language of the elves, but does not know why. Anyway, the leader was informed by a subordinate that one of the humans is strong, and this subordinate wishes to fight him. With that, Jinwoo swiftly incapacitates the challenging elf with a precise strike of his dagger, but when he attacks the leader, he is able to block in time, though the horse was not so lucky. The elf leader asks why Jinwoo is pretending to be a human. The man doesn't understand, so the creature explains that his race hears a voice that orders them to kill humans, but no one had heard about Jinwoo's song. Regarding this, Jinwoo imagines that this case is similar to the system's instructions. Perhaps the voice does not direct the elves to him because he is the player. Finally, the enemy announces that he has no reason to fight and wishes to resolve the situation sensibly. If Jinwoo hands over the humans behind him, he will be left in peace. Without responding directly, Jinwoo asks why the elves hunt humans, but as soon as the opponent starts to answer, a strange effect occurs as if time had turned back, and the elf leader makes the same proposal again about Jinwoo handing over his friends in exchange for his life. In the end, the man makes it clear that he does not accept the proposal. The elf remembers that they are outnumbered, but Jinwoo-sung highly doubts that. At that moment, the bears and shadow soldiers are summoned and placed in front of the elves, who do not flinch in advance against the foes. Soon, an intense fight begins while the three members of Jinwoo's group flee desperately. Seeing this, some elves aim their arrows at the fugitives, but Jinwoo slaughters all in time. Having done so, he understands why the leader of the elves is confident. After all, although the summons are immortal, Jinwoo needs to spend magical power to regenerate them, meaning that at some point this mana will run out. Besides that, the chief of the Ice Killers is visibly stronger than him. Speaking of this elf, he charges against Jinwoo-sung, who blocks the blow and reflects that even with Igris, this battle will not be easy. The elf introduces himself as Baruka and asks the name of his rival, who responds and summons his daggers. Without delay, the two clash again, and Baruka is so surprised by the opponent's skill that he admits it has been a long time since he had such an interesting fight. Suddenly, a giant fireball falls from the sky and hits the leader of the Ice Elves directly. It was the spectral mages subordinates of Igris, the Blood Red. Meanwhile, Kim Chul finally wakes up, remembering he was struck by Jinwoo, so he grabs his sword from the snow to rejoin the fight. Unaware of this, Jinwoo reflects on how the magical soldiers bought him some time. Regardless, Baruka emerges unscathed from a fireball and charges at Jinwoo, who just notices Kim arriving behind him. As Baruka closes in, his opponent has a vision of the future. In it, he summons a huge creature with an axe and shield to handle the elf. Back in the present, Igris is pitted against Kim Chul and mercilessly pierces his stomach with a fatal blow. With the man's death, Jinwoo commands him to rise and transforms the tank into his shadow ally. Meanwhile, as Baruka approaches the enemies, he is repelled by the shadow giant Jinwoo had envisioned. In fact, it was the spectral form of Kim Chul all along whom Jinwoo names Iron. Despite the dark soldier's frightening appearance, Baruka shows no fear and vows to tear the specter to pieces first. Thus, Iron and Baruka begin their battle, and noticing that the axe warrior is slow, the elf plans to exploit this weakness. In the midst of this, Jinwoo's teammates are hidden in the forest. Songyee asks if hunter battles are always like this, and Heejin replies that if it were her, she wouldn't even be a hunter. Honestly, she has never seen anything like this. Bored with the opponent's slowness, Baruka challenges everyone at once, including Iron, Igris, and Jinwoo-sung himself. Not to be rude, the trio charges at the adversary, who manages to handle them without any damage. Motivated to kill Iron first, the Ice Elf strikes his shield hard and dodges a blow from Sigrid at the last moment. However, this move was the setup for Jinwoo to pierce Baruka's shoulder with his dagger. Despite the damage inflicted, Jinwoo is impressed by how the rival escaped the fatal blow amidst everything. After narrowly escaping death with cunning, Baruka declares that Jinwoo is underestimating him. In turn, the man admits that the enemy is strong, but he can't say the same for his soldiers. With that, Baruka surveys the battlefield and sees that his subordinates have all been killed. Regardless, he doubts Jinwoo's pawns are worth anything without him and resumes attacking the human. Jinwoo reacts by throwing his dagger at the elf, who dodges and thinks the man irresponsible for doing so. However, the player makes the dagger return towards the target at full speed, forcing Baruka to block the weapon in the nick of time. Moreover, this move costs him his blade, which breaks on impact. Then, Jinwoo orders Iron to attack, and the giant grasps the elf tightly. With that, the spectral mages cast fire at the target and cause a massive explosion. Yet despite the coordinated and successful attack, Baruka emerges from the ashes and vows to kill everyone. But he did not count on Jinwoo's sudden appearance, who stabs his dagger into the elf's rib and declares the end of the fight. Still, Baruka refuses to yield and stands up, until Iron uses a giant hammer to crush the enemy and splatter his blood everywhere. With the victory, Jinwoo levels up and notices that Iron is still pummeling Baruka's corpse out of pure rage. Then he teaches the Spectre to control his impulses. Having done that, he returns to his teammates and announces that now they can leave. At that moment, the portal reopens and the group celebrates their survival and the chance to return home. Nevertheless, before returning, Jinwoo has something to do with Baruka. Outside the portal, manager An believes that it has been a week inside and Bak can go home if he wants, as he will be waiting. However, the S rank decides to stay as long as there are guild members in danger, even if it means staying until dawn. With that, the portal returns to its natural color and out come the first hunters, Go and Park Heejin. Next, Jinwoo Sung and Han Song-yi appear, and then the portal closes. Baek asks where Kim Chul is, and the survivors lower their heads, responding without words. As Jinwoo was leaving with Song-yi, Baek wishes to ask some questions. Removing the man's hand from his shoulder, the young man advises that he's tired and suggests the S rank seek answers from someone in his guild. Annoyed by the man's behavior, Baek grabs his shoulder again, this time with his body partially transformed. He emphasizes that 6 members of his guild have disappeared, and it is up to him to find out why. In turn, with eyes radiating mana, Jinwoo responds that might be so, but it was he who saved the survivors, so some gratitude would be nice. Hearing this, the White Tiger Guild Master apologizes and admits the boy is right. After Jinwoo's departure, Baek asks Heejin what got into that guy, as he doesn't seem very sociable. Heejin responds that he became moody after defeating the dungeon boss. An argues that Jinwoo must just be tired because he isn't a bad person. Finally, Baek asks An to recruit Hunter Sung to the White Tiger Guild at any cost. Sometime later, Jinwoo drops Song-yi off at her door. She thanks him for today and counts on her colleague when they do this again. After starting the car, Jinwoo notes that not even a full day has passed on Earth, while he displays Baruka's dagger, the only interesting item he got from the red portal. Definitely, the level of that ice elf was too high, so much so that Jinwoo couldn't capture his shadow even after 3 attempts, the most he could. Thus, already at home and looking at his face in the mirror, the protagonist ponders that it was a lot of effort for little return, although this was the 3rd time. At this, his sister shouts from outside and threatens to eat without him. The next day, Jinwoo meets Yu Jinhoo, who was wearing ridiculously shiny armor, for them to go somewhere, and they must pick someone up along the way. Thus, they go to Song-yi, who gets very close to Jinwoo in the car and apologizes for making him pick her up. Seeing things heating up, Jinhoo warns the handsome man that Miss Han is underage. Jinwoo asks what that has to do with anything. Then Jinhoo changes the subject and starts the car. After their journey, the group arrives in a dungeon and is immediately caught in the midst of a conflict. Jinhoo, instead of joining in, is captivated by the ghostly figures fighting against the ogres. He asks Jinwoo what these creatures are, and the protagonist realizes he had mentioned them to his partner before. Without going into details, he simply replies that it's one of his abilities. Unsatisfied, Yu wants to know if he can conjure ghostly soldiers, but Jinwoo feels it's too complex to explain right now and changes the subject. After the victory, he snaps his fingers and orders his army to collect the precious stones, and now Jinhoo kneels down and asks to at least help with the gems. Instantly, a shadow soldier hands a bunch of gems to the hunter, who thanks him for the understanding and brings a smile to his friend's face. Meanwhile, on a shipwrecked boat, a warrior screams in despair while a man tells him not to yell and to stay calm, explaining that the others who are down have only fainted. However, as he doesn't speak English, he assumes the warrior has no idea what he's saying, so he points to himself and says a few things that go misunderstood. Returning to the duo of hunters, they head to a restaurant after the expedition to enjoy some meat and a drink, celebrating the completion of Jinwoo's 19th mission under contract with Yu Jinhoo. According to the hare, it would have been impossible without his comrade. Jinwoo asks what the next step for his friend is, and he explains that he's going to take a written test at an association to obtain a guild master's license and use this license to negotiate with his father. Meanwhile, Jinwoo mentions he will be out of touch for a while, as he needs to go to a certain place. After this, Jinhoo turns his glass and preempts that he should be told to keep quiet if he's being annoying. He then reveals he has a brother 10 years his senior who doesn't like him. The two have never spent time together like true brothers. On the other hand, Jinwoo saved Jinhoo's life and accepted his request. In other words, the hare lowers his head and confesses he wishes his friend were his brother. When this is said, an awkward silence envelops the room, and Jinhoo keeps his head down until Jinwoo serves his comrade and replies that, in that case, they are brothers from now on. Hearing these words, Jinhoo holds back tears, turns another glass of drink, and almost imposingly offers more meat to his new brother. Jinwoo asks if he's drunk, but he insists he's sober. In the meantime, the man who assaulted others on the shipwrecked boat is found imprisoned and handcuffed. According to the authorities responsible for the arrest, this man identifies as a foreign hunter who was trapped in a portal 10 years ago and never managed to escape until he ended up in the United States. Since he does not speak English, the suspect's interrogation must be conducted with a translator present. At the moment, there isn't belief that this prisoner is a humanoid beast, so the authorities have requested assistance from an S-rank hunter from Washington, who is a compatriot of his. This hunter's name is Huang Dongsu, and the investigation will continue as soon as he returns to the United States. By the way, one of the officers asks the prisoner's name, and another, struggling to pronounce it, says his name is Sung Il-wan. After returning home, ready to leave again, Sung Il-wan tells his sister he will be away for a month with a friend, and she asks since when did he have a girlfriend and why he hasn't told even his little sister. In the next scene, the boy returns to a place he had been some time ago. Around level 20, he faced Cerberus in the Demon Castle and couldn't finish the job, but now he has tripled in level and feels he has a chance. So he opens the dungeon door with the appropriate key and storms in. As soon as he enters, he is tasked with collecting 10,000 demonic souls, which makes the young man sweat due to the absurd amount, but since he returned to the castle in search of the elixir of life, be it 10 or 100,000, Jinwoo will take down each one. Meanwhile, as he submits his resume to his father, Jinwoo asks that the guild be passed on to him. The old man recalls that Jinsung, his elder son, had another idea for this guild, but Jinwoo argues that this plan of putting someone from outside as master is too risky for the company. That said, his father mentions that it was Jinwoo Sung involved in the dungeon tragedy, where Huang Dong-suk's group was eliminated, and in the death of the prisoners from the supervision department. Still, this man remains free and unpunished for his actions. And it was this man who participated in literally all of Jinwoo's expeditions to the portals. At the recent incident of the Red Portal from the White Tiger Guild a few days ago, it was said that Sung Il-wan Sung was responsible for safely evacuating the survivors. So Jinwoo's father imagines that his son managed to get the guild master license largely thanks to Jinwoo's help. Hence, he questions if the son feels he could lead a guild knowing this. Still, even after hearing everything his father said, the boy insists that he would like to have the Yujin Guild. Therefore, the powerful businessman gives his son a chance, but with a condition. According to what he has heard, the White Tiger is wanting to recruit Jinwoo Sung after the Red Portal incident, and Jinwoo must bring him to the Yujin Guild before that happens. Speaking of him, Jinwoo couldn't extract the souls of the dead demons because their mana is contaminated, which is a pity since he had stacked hundreds. However, the hunter receives written permission to enter the second floor, then a huge light, probably the teleportation point, emanates from a specific spot in the dungeon, which, as Jinwoo comments, is gigantic, almost like an entire city within a single building. Walking could tire the hunter, so he summons the leader of the ice bears to serve as his mount. As soon as he mounts the animal, a horde of demons appears ahead, but the bear charges through and paves the way to their destination. Because of this movement, Jinwoo names the bear Tank. In the meantime, we head to the Hunters Association, a massive structure equipped with gyms and swimming pools. Amidst a few girls swimming, Chahat emerges from the water, capturing the attention of others with her beauty. However, all she can think about is an incident that happened once. During a meeting with Master Choi Jongin, she wanted to make the information about the flying ants public, but Choi responded that he had received an order from the association, as they believed disclosing this fact would only cause panic among the population. Either way, there's no need to worry. The priority is to increase the association's power to make it the country's largest guild and take on the responsibilities that come with it. Turning back to Jinwoo after killing another demon, he reflects on his fear that this dungeon was rank S when he got the key to enter it, but the demons living there seem to be no more than rank B. However, they always come in large numbers, and the further the human goes, the stronger the monsters get. Still, if Jinwoo can take down the demons carrying the permissions, he will be able to keep moving up floor by floor. That said, if the structure of the demon castle is the same as the original tower, there are 100 floors, and the hunter can only imagine the level of demons he will encounter at the last one. Now, more importantly, Jinwoo seems not to have enough food for such a long expedition, besides the promise he made to Jinna. So just like the battle against the demons, Jinwoo also races against time, but ultimately, he reaches the 10,000 souls set by the mission. The young man does not know how high he can climb in this dungeon, but either way, he moves forward. In doing so, he encounters the Lord of the Lower Floors, a demon known as the Volcano of Greed, guarding the 50th floor. Meanwhile, manager An Sangmin visits Jinwoo's house along with Park Heejin to try to recruit him for White Tiger, but finds only his sister at home, who says her brother went on a trip. An notes that Jinwoo has not participated in any recent raids and that the last location tracked by the association was the center of the urban area. Heejin is amazed to see that her partner can find out such things, and he explains that this is his job. In any case, the boy's whereabouts are now unknown. Returning to him, Jinwoo Sung orders his army to leave the enemy leader to him, so the subordinates advance to fight the other opponents. The spectral mages shoot flames at the demons, while Igris, the Blood Red, charges through the enemy ranks, causing a real havoc. Thanks to the increase in his intelligence, Junwoo was able to enhance both his magical power and the number of soldiers he can summon. Putting that aside, the hunter wonders how long the leader of the demons plans to stay seated. Since the enemy refuses to move, the human plans to take the initiative. However, before he could realize it, the volcano of greed surges at an unbelievable speed to attack Junwoo. Junwoo reacts quickly and delivers a punch that sends the demon flying, startling the young man himself, who wonders how much strength he put into his attributes to manage that. Faced with the damage incurred, the volcano of greed is filled with rage and activates its Cerberus ability. When the giant demon charges at Junwoo, the man orders Iron to send his shield to him. With the shield raised, Junwoo is able to block the giant's heavy mace, but the intense combo suffered starts to worry the human about the health of the shield. Defending patiently, the man waits for a single opening to counterattack, and at a certain movement of the demon, he manages to break free from the combo and leaps towards the enemy's neck, but the volcano immediately turns and strikes with its club. On reflex, Junwoo activates the hand of the ruler and absorbs the impact to the point of not dying right there. After avoiding his end, Junwoo wonders if this monster can read his thoughts, while imagining that the only place he could inflict damage would be on its head. Either way, first he needs to restrict these agile and indecipherable movements of the giant, so Junwoo uses the rage of the volcano of greed to lure it to a building. As soon as it approaches, Junwoo quickly climbs the structure, while the demon cannot stop and crashes into it. Having this advantage, the hunter finally hits the opponent with his dagger, winning the fight and being rewarded with a fragment of the Tree of Life. Meanwhile, Dong-soo arrives in the United States to interrogate Sung Il-won, but the first to ask is the interrogated. He wants to know how much humans know about the existence of portals and magical beasts, for all this is nothing compared to the worst catastrophic force that has finally awakened, and Sung Il-won's goal is to prevent a disaster from happening. Ignoring the one who believes to be just a magical beast, Dong-soo asks if the prisoner still remembers the name of his wife or any of his 2 children. Then the man replies that one of his children is named Jinwoo. That said, Dong-soo promises that the 2 will meet again in hell. And speaking of hell, Jinwoo Sung advances with his army through the upper floors and eliminates Metis, the sole guide. Returning to the interrogation, the surroundings have turned to ruins. According to officials involved in the case, this is what happens when 2 rank S hunters come into conflict. In fact, they were lucky not to have been injured because Hwang Dong-soo was defeated in the blink of an eye. At that moment, Jinwoo Sung's food finally runs out on the 75th floor. Despite lamenting, he recognizes that he got good items on the expedition. An earring won from the boss of the 50th floor and a necklace from defeating a skeleton. In addition, the Mirror of Greed will be quite useful for his spectral mages, and lastly, he gained a key that he is not quite sure what it opens. In any case, Jinwoo's priority is to gather the 3 fragments of the Tree of Life. The first he obtained by defeating the Volcano of Greed. The second is the water from the Echo Forest, won by killing Metis. Thus, the last piece remains for Jinwoo Sung to save his mother. After stepping through the portal from which he entered, Jinwoo checks his inventory where he finds 2 materials needed to craft the Elixir of Life. Now, all that remains is to find the purified blood of the Demon King, but to obtain this item, he needs to be fully prepared. Following his expedition through the Demon Castle, the protagonist has gained several levels, but officially he is still ranked as E, so he cannot participate in missions beyond that level. For this reason, Jinwoo Sung decides to reassess his rank. The next day at the Hunters Association headquarters, Hyun Kitchell is eager to discover what kind of talents they will recruit today. Watching a man in a purple shirt among the candidates, he suspects the guy is rank C. In front of him, the individual appears to be rank E, looking for the next person to assess. Kitchell is startled by what he sees and immediately calls Bak to inform him that Hyun Kitchell, assistant manager Sung, has come to reevaluate his rank. Upon hearing this, the boss rushes down. Returning to the protagonist, he hears the man in the purple shirt trying to calm the other candidate, arguing that from what he's heard, the assessment process is quite straightforward. In fact, the other candidate admits he needs the money he could earn as a hunter, so he might get his wife and daughter back who left him behind. Then the man in purple explains that as long as you are assessed as rank D or above, the guild will offer you an invitation and everything will be fine. That is, as long as you don't stay at rank E, you can make a living off of it. Hearing this conversation, Jinwoo finds it ironic that he still belongs to the lowest level and smiles slightly. Soon after, the boy is called for revaluation and places his hand on the black globe. The professional monitoring the process is surprised by an error message on the system, so she tries to repeat the procedure, but the same fault occurs. The director enters the room to ask what's going on, and when the employee shows him, he notes that it's not a mechanical failure. In fact, the machine is incapable of assessing this hunter, as his magical power exceeds what it can analyze. In other words, this young man is the 10th rank as hunter in the country's history. Meanwhile, Choi asks how the research on the flying ants is going, and Jinchul reports that the department conducted an autopsy comparing the internal structure and residual magical power of the old specimen with this new one, but it will still take some time for any conclusions to emerge. Then, Choi mentions that he heard about the Red Portal incident and that the White Tiger Guild allowed a non-member to participate in this raid and even let him defeat the boss. The master wants to know who this person is, so Jinchul explains that he was present on the last day of the incident, but didn't stay until the end, so he doesn't know many details. Choi responds that it's a pity and comments that the hall is noisy. Jinchul thinks it's the awakened being assessed, but decides to check just in case. Before the manager goes, the guild master highlights that he's curious and will accompany his colleague. In the hall, everyone is in disbelief that a hunter before them cannot be assessed by the headquarters machine. When the news spreads, the entire crowd is riveted on Junwoo Sung, who is talking with the director. He asks the young man to return in 3 days to attempt the evaluation again. Amidst this, Kitchell reflects that this is happening exactly as An said it would. At that moment, Master Choi Jong-in enters the hall and draws the attention of those around. According to Jinwoo, this guy is the pinnacle of fire-type mages known as the Supreme Hunter. Similarly, Choi assesses the young man with his insane amount of mana enveloping his body and concludes that he is the reason for such a commotion there. By the way, Jinwoo begins walking towards the representative of the guild's association, who asks if the young man has joined any clans and if they could talk about it. However, Jinwoo Sung completely ignores the master and walks out. Embarrassed, Choi asks Jinchul if he had already told Jinwoo who he was, and the manager confirms. Thus, the master begins to believe that he's not all that. At that moment, Baek arrives running, then Choi surmises that the president of the White Tiger in person appeared because of that kid. Thus, he presumes that Jinwoo was responsible for conquering the Red Portal. Similarly, seeing Master Choi passing without saying anything, Baek also realizes that he just discovered the truth. At night, Jinwoo visits his mother in the hospital and feels she might wake up at any moment. With this in mind, even though she is unconscious, the son asks the woman to wait for him a little longer. Exiting the room, Jinchul was waiting for Jinwoo, saying that the young man made him realize how blind he was. The surveillance team's job is to observe the hunters and punish those who break the law. Usually, Jinchul trusts his own judgment, but everything seems turned upside down. Uninterested in the conversation, Jinwoo asks if he really needs to be monitored, and the manager explains that yes, but not as a criminal. In fact, surveillance is the only team capable of resolving incidents with hunters, but when it comes to a rank S, even they can't do much. With that said, the man informs that someone wants to meet Jinwoo Sung. At that, Jinwoo turns again, while Go Gunhee emerges through the shadows with a friendly smile on his face, introducing himself as the president of the Hunters Association. First of all, he congratulates the young man for reaching rank S, because once the machine has that problem, it means the hunter has reached the ultimate level. Nevertheless, they ask the boy to return in 3 days to keep in touch with such a talented hunter, since Gunhee's guild cannot compete with the bigger ones in terms of payment or fame. For example, Woo Jinchul is one of the best hunters they have, but still he is rank A. Thus, Go Gunhee goes straight to the point and offers a prominent position to Jinwoo in the association, because nowadays the nation's greatest defenders are not the state, but the hunters. This corps is made up of the 5 largest guilds, which are almost never at peace with one another. In fact, wherever Jinwoo decides to join, it will cause an imbalance among the major guilds. In turn, the association is the 6th power and has taken on the role of keeping the 5 largest in line, which is an indispensable service for the country. For this reason, Go would like Jinwoo to be part of the team. Listening carefully to each detail, Jinwoo stops to reflect seriously, as a job at the association is very secure and influential in society, especially considering that Go Gunhee was the first S-rank hunter to awaken in Korea, so much so that no one believes he is over 80 years old, given his enviable physique. Although he is retired, the president is on the same level as Jinwoo, even though the boy tries so hard to level up. In other words, accepting this job will change Jinwoo's life forever. However, the young hunter refuses the offer because his place is in the dungeon, fighting against magical beasts. Seeing truth in the boy's eyes, the association's president feels a pang in his heart and thinks that if he were 10 years younger, he could stand side by side with this youth in a dungeon. One way or another, he does not insist and lets the boy go, who asks to return home considering that his sister is alone. With Jinwoo's departure, Gunhee tells Jinchul to cancel his schedule for today because he doesn't want anything to disturb the same bad feeling he had when he discovered that not even an S-rank healer could make up for his old age anymore. With this in mind, he invites his friend for a drink. On the way home, Jinwoo notices that the association mainly deals with rank D and E dungeons, and that he needs to level up as quickly as possible to be able to heal his mother. The next morning, Dong-soo wakes up all broken in a hospital bed. Even seeing the terrible condition of the man, a guy arrives asking if Il-won-sung is really a magical beast. About this, Dong-soo has no doubt. With that explained, the other man warns that the command center is after that guy, but he thinks they won't be able to catch someone even Dong-soo couldn't handle. Left alone, the businessman remembers Il-won's foot on his chest, telling him to leave his family alone for his own good. Otherwise, not even death will save Dong-soo from Il-won. Remembering this, Dong-soo feels the humiliation of defeat physically hurting his body, so he decides to go after the guy again with the appropriate equipment. In the case, the man was referring to an artifact, which are pieces of equipment so high level that no artisan could create them. With the increasing number of hunters, you can even find several artifacts for sale at online auctions, something that Jinwoo-sung researches in search of one for himself. But the problem is that this item is too expensive for anyone to buy. Needing better equipment to return to the demon castle, Jinwoo thinks about selling the Orb of Avarice, but such a powerful item would raise questions about how an E-rank hunter got hold of such a thing. Amid this, the boy sees that there is a group of miners hiring hunters for an A-rank raid. Meanwhile, Go-gunny accesses Jinwoo's data from 4 years ago, when his photo was still very different from today. Also for this reason, the president asks if the boy might have faked his rank, and Jinchul replies that there are records of Jinwoo being seriously injured several times, so it's hard to believe he did that. By the way, he has been covering the treatment of his mother's eternal sleep and his sister's studies. Go comments that you don't see this dedication in young people nowadays, and Jinchul sees a record that Jinwoo joined a team of miners for a raid, and Gunny decrees that it's hard to predict the actions of this kid. When he arrives at work, the boss asks if Jinwoo is rank E, which he confirms. Then he asks if he has experience with mining, and the answer is no. Imagining that the hunter is the combat type, the boss figures he shouldn't worry about the physical form of the worker. He says there are many guys around like Jinwoo-sung, so just relax and everything will be fine. When the man leaves, Jinwoo reflects that more difficult raids require a certain degree of specialization. For example, the attack team takes care of the magical monsters, the mining team extracts the mana crystals, and the collection team removes the carcasses of the monsters. Although there are many people involved, Jinwoo thinks the profit is worth it, even though dungeons of such a high level have dangers hard to imagine. Speaking of which, hearing a fearsome roar coming from inside the cave, Choi conjures an extremely powerful fireball that pulverizes the giant monsters in front of him. Then he asks the tanks to do their job, and the shield hunters close a barrier in front of the master. A fireball that reaches them is blocked by a joint spell from the shield bearers. Done with that, the group proceeds deeper into the dungeon. Nearby, Jinwoo hears that the attack team is leaving, so he realizes that everything in the dungeon has already been killed, except for the boss. When he crossed paths with Choi Jong-in yesterday, Jinwoo knew this guy was strong, but to clear an A-rank dungeon without breaking a sweat is just too much. In the meantime, passing by the miners is the second in command of the Hunters Guild, the 9th S rank in Korea, Cha-ha the ballerina. Immediately, she senses an unusual aura among the workers, even thinking that President Go might be around. Finally, as the attack team has done their part, it's time for the miners and collectors to get to work. Once inside, Jinwoo is more concerned about sensing a signal of magical power coming from the depths of the cave, probably emitted by the boss of this A-rank dungeon, stronger than Vulcan and Metis in the Demon Castle. Knowing this, the guy itches to go down there right now and test the power of such a monster. Around him, Jinwoo hears a group of miners mocking an E-rank newbie who joined the team, which makes it realize that low-level individuals will always be treated the same way. Moreover, when a guy bumps into Jinwoo and squares up to him, he quickly backs down as soon as the young man shows his mana-filled eye. Besides that, while he mines, other coworkers notice that Jinwoo is too strong to be such a low level, but anyway, that's a blessing from the mining crew. Later, it's lunchtime. Jinwoo-sung takes advantage of everyone leaving and plans to use this break to head to the boss chamber. He knows that if he defeats the boss, the portal will close, which will cause a big loss for the guild. But that doesn't mean he can't flick the monster a few times. However, at that very moment, Cha-ha appears, pressing a cloth against her nose and asking what the worker is doing there. Jinwoo lied about getting lost and ending up there, so the huntress told him to leave since this was the boss's chamber, and if the boss were provoked, the whole team would be in great danger. Reflecting on this, Jinwoo realized that the rumors about Cha-ha were not exaggerated because she approached him without him even noticing. Suddenly, the man turned to the woman and she thought she was going mad, for she could swear he had been holding a gun, but had vanished. Eventually, he walked past her calmly, but Cha-ha noticed something off and asked the collector to wait a moment. When he stopped, the woman literally sniffed him, leaving him embarrassed. She noticed this guy didn't smell like the other hunters, which was quite strange. On the contrary, this man even had a pleasant scent. Thinking about it, she saw his E-rank identification and asked the worker to be careful on his way back and let him go. When Jinwoo rejoined his team, they said he was lucky to have gotten so close to Cha-ha, as everyone else could only dream of such an opportunity. According to them, her task was to protect the workers in the dungeon, and she covered their lunch breaks. The only odd thing about her was that Cha-ha didn't like the smell of hunters, which is why she always wore a cloth over her nose in the dungeons. On this, Jinwoo reflected that the woman had acted differently with him for some reason, as if he wasn't a hunter, just as Baruka had noted at the red portal. Jinwoo guessed it might be because he was the player. Undoubtedly, having the system on his side provided some significant advantages, though he didn't fully understand what it meant to be the player. After the shift, Jinwoo received his payment for the day, and the boss said they could leave early thanks to the newcomer, who had proven to be exceptional at work and very productive. Honestly, the boss had never seen anyone as naturally skilled as Jinwoo Sung, which is why he offered him a permanent position on the team. Jinwoo thanked him for the opportunity, but explained he had only come because he had some free time today. Thus, the boss invited him to come back just tomorrow, as there would be a double raid. One rank A and another rank C. Jinwoo thought about the offer, remembering his revaluation was only after tomorrow, so he agreed to show up, exciting the boss enough to offer double the payment. That night, Cha-ha contacted the association seeking information about Jinwoo Sung, but discovered that this hunter's data was locked. Moreover, she learned that Master Choi had requested information about this member of the organization. For some reason, Jinwoo's information was locked, even though he wasn't high level. Later, as she lay down to sleep, the woman couldn't stop thinking about this case. After all, that man had behaved strangely in the dungeon, and now that she knew Master Choi was also after him, the huntress felt something was definitely off, especially since Jinwoo had a pleasant scent. Speaking of the man, he arrived for work, pleasing the team with his presence as he was a true human machine when it came to resource extraction. Seeing those smiles, Jinwoo was thrown back to memories of the double dungeon he had participated in that time, when everything had indeed begun. When work began in earnest, the guy continued to impress and meet expectations, showing such efficient work that the workers could rest longer before the rank later on. At lunchtime, the boss again invited Jinwoo to join the team and promised to pay 5 times the usual salary. But before any response, a hunter approached the collecting team. It was Captain Sung Ki-kun, who wanted someone from the mining team on loan, stating that whoever accepted would receive a hazard pay addition. On this, the team leader remembered that his people weren't skilled enough to closely follow such a dangerous raid, so he issued that it wasn't even about the money. However, Jinwoo Sung offered to go with the captain, leaving his colleagues dumbfounded and emphasizing that risking life for money wasn't worth it, but Jinwoo stood by his decision. Accordingly, the captain formally introduced himself to the young man, who did the same. Outside the portal, some hunters expressed some concern, but the captain assured them they wouldn't have major issues as being from the secondary team. The main one had already eliminated all the stronger monsters. Surveying his surroundings, Jinwoo noticed there were 6 rank hunters and 3 rank Bs, and he found it impressive that the guild could send such a qualified secondary team for this job. Inside, the man felt less magical power than in yesterday's dungeon, but a strange premonition took hold of his body, the same thing he had felt at the red portal. Noticing the collector was uneasy, a woman from the group tried to calm him, saying that the captain of the team and the other hunters were very strong. In the midst of this, Sung Ki-hun reflected that he would officially become captain after this raid, and that he might not have the strength of the master and the vice master of the guild, but he was an extremely competent and capable S-rank hunter. Suddenly, the team heard a sound and instantly went on the defensive, even though no order had been given, which impressed Jinwoo Sung. Then red eyes emerged from the depths of the dungeon and approached a pack of jackals that attacked the hunters at once. The fighters reacted accordingly and demonstrated their full strength in battle, with each member displaying characteristics that complemented those of the others, forming a team visibly well prepared for any situation. After the victory, they wondered what jackals were doing in a rank A dungeon, as they were rank C monsters and usually didn't survive in such a hostile environment. Then Jinwoo saw that the canines were wearing collars and imagined they had been domesticated by someone and trained to serve as hunting dogs. Speaking of which, heavy footsteps were heard in the vicinity, until a group of larger, intimidating-looking orcs appeared. Without mincing words, the leading orc hurled his spear with force at the rival team's captain, causing an impressive crack in his shield. At that moment, the team's tank provoked the opponents to focus on him, but the skill didn't work, and the orcs attacked the back row, but a mage repelled the adversary with a fireball. Despite this, the orc struck showed immense magical resistance and barely suffered any damage. A witch binds another monster with her magic, but given its immense strength, she can only hold it captive for a few seconds. The wizard summons 2 flame warriors to fight alongside him, but even though it's a powerful spell that consumes a lot of mana, his summons don't seem to make much difference in the fight. The group's fighter shows off her hand-to-hand combat techniques, but soon she is thrown against the wall and takes significant damage. Immediately, the healer is called to that part of the battlefield, but there are too many orcs and she's already occupied. To avoid being completely surrounded, the captain orders his subordinates to split into groups of 3 and scatter, since just one of these orcs is enough to go head-to-head with an A-rank hunter, meaning the B-rank members stand no chance. As expected, one of the lower-level team members has his arm torn off, forcing the witch to intervene to save her companion's life. With cover, the healer rushes to regenerate the fighter's arm, but the arrival of an even taller orc behind her makes her fear for her life. However, some unknown force suddenly appears and drives the monster to death. As the hunters face the orcs, they realize they were getting slower. This was because someone or something was moving through the battlefield like a ghost, tearing at the orcs' joints, limiting their movement, and making the contest much easier. Although not part of the team, Jin Woo-sung did not want to see these people die, so he helped stealthily so that no one would discover it was him who turned the tide. With the advantage, the team manages to win the fight. Afterwards, the healer asks the leader if he noticed anything strange during the fight, and the captain confirms that he did. He asks if it was Gina whom intervened in that way, but she replies that she couldn't possibly do such a thing as she only has attack magic and telekinesis. Moreover, the other mages are all focused on firepower, so no one there could act so stealthily. With that, the witch looks directly at Jin Woo-sung, as she knows well it was him, but imagines he has his reasons for not wanting to show his face and lets him remain hidden for now. Finally, the team discusses whether they should proceed or not, as this dungeon proved to be far more dangerous than they anticipated. Jinwoo imagines that the captain wants to show off and move forward, but to his surprise, Sum Ki-hoon announces a retreat, relieving the other expedition members. However, when they reach the portal to leave, a barrier blocks their passage. The witch commits to undoing this block, but warns that she will need time to do so. Moreover, she thinks to herself that if there is magic of this level in this place, leaving was definitely the right decision. Speaking of which, all the hunters feel a suffocating surge of magical power, so the witch hurries to perform the procedure as quickly as possible, as the general feeling was that something very bad was going to happen at any moment. Similarly, Jinwoo reflects that the magical power is so intense that even the B ranks noticed it, so he doesn't understand why no one felt this pressure from outside the portal. Suddenly, some group members suffer a violent reaction and begin to bleed on their own, while the aura of the blockade penetrates their bodies like a cursed trap. Just then, when the other comrades turn around, a massive horde of orcs is lurking, with about 50 armed warriors. Despite this sinister and oppressive atmosphere, the human captain steps forward and attempts to engage in dialogue with the enemy leader. After all, he knows well that a direct fight would only result in his group's death. Likewise, the orc leader approaches and lets out a roar in the man's face, speaking some words in an unknown language with his demonic voice. As a result, all the orcs repeat the words in unison, as if performing a ritual. The head of the orc leader starts to spin frenetically inexplicably, until his eye shines intensely, doubling in intensity. Then he announces in the human's language that his name is Karvelgen, and that he wanted to meet these hunters. Maintaining a confident posture, Kyun asks if Karvelgen was responsible for blocking the exit, and the orc confirms, boasting that he's a proud master of curses. The captain then inquires if there's anyone in that cave more powerful than him, and Karvelgen laughs arrogantly, assuring that no one there can surpass him. Finally, Orc Chief makes a proposal. Either the humans accompany him, or they will be killed right there. Although they seem to have 2 options, the truth is that Ki-hoon only has one and he knows it. Therefore, he agrees to follow the orcs. Thus, the orc chief walks away and the captain takes the opportunity to call Jin Woo-sung. When Jinwoo appears, he informs him that the group will attack as soon as the chief reappears. Although he does not know what will come of it, maybe Karvelgen will not be able to maintain the barrier while facing them. At that moment, Jinwoo must leave the dungeon and call the main team. He then asks if the captain intends to die there, and the answer is straightforward. The goal of a hunter is never simply to leave the dungeon, but to ensure that the portal is closed. Similarly, the healer approaches and asks the collector a favor. She hands him a written will and wants Jinwoo to take it to her family. After all, hunters are trained for this moment, but he has nothing to do with it and should escape. This feeling of despair reminds Jinwoo of the double dungeon, but on that occasion he was abandoned by the others. Unlike now, when these people are willing to let him be the only one to leave with his life. With this in mind, he collects the teammates' will and promises to deliver it. Outside the portal, Chaha tries to find Jinwoo, but as she can't, she asks the team chief where he might be. Then the man informs her that Jinwoo is working as a carrier inside the portal. Meanwhile, the expedition group follows the horde and arrives at a massive structure built by the orcs, who reveal themselves to be a relatively advanced and well-organized civilization. Soon, the hunters find themselves standing before the throne, where the king addresses them as human worms. Cha-ha reflects that an E-rank hunter volunteered for an A-rank portal, and she can't fathom what the kid is thinking. Moreover, she saw Jinwoo yesterday in front of the dungeon boss's room, apparently unarmed. Without a doubt, this man is suspicious. Because of this, the hunter decides to go back in to take another look, but first she borrows a weapon from the head of the collection team. The man hands her a pickaxe, as there's nothing more effective available, so she resigns herself to enter unarmed. The man questions if she's really going to do that and argues that it's better to enter with a pickaxe than empty-handed, so Cha-ha takes the tool back and enters the portal. Inside, the orcs bang their spears on the ground as if announcing something significant in their tradition. Observing the strength of these monsters, some hunters claim that this army could topple entire cities, especially the 4 that stand apart from the rest. Compared to the others, their aura is violently oppressive. Suddenly, Kargalgan, the orc chief, raises his hand and an absolute silence takes over the throne room. With sweat dripping down his face, Sum Ki-hoon ponders that his squad's goal is to close the portal, meaning they need to defeat this boss right there. As he removes his mask, Kargalgan unleashes a terrifying spell into the air and asks if the humans present are afraid of him. The hunters immediately feel the pressure and some tremble in terror, until the human leader asks why they were brought here. Without mincing words, the orc master replies that they will be killed one by one to serve as entertainment for the soldiers. Kuvun reflects that the lives of his allies are merely toys to be discarded at the hands of these orcs, while the monster chief notices that among the humans, one of them seems different for some reason, and that individual is Jinwoo Sung. Refusing to die in vain, Ki-hoon charges forward offensively and orders his companions to do the same, but as everyone was paralyzed by fear or by some spell, the leader charges alone with his sword drawn. At that moment, the orc chief conjures the Hymn of Protection, a magical shield that repels the attacker. Then he uses gravitational magic and gravity acceleration to lift the enemy high and slam him back to the ground with overwhelming force repeatedly. The companions watch helplessly, with a look of despair on their faces. From there, Jinwoo catches the captain and gently places him on the ground, explaining that this dungeon once belonged to the hunters, and he did not intend to interfere in this matter, but now everyone is in danger. When the team rushes towards the captain to see how he is, Nor threatens to attack, but Jinwoo paralyzes him and throws the monster onto the ceiling. Having done that, the man asks if his comrades can leave all the magical beasts to him, and the captain, with extreme difficulty, grants permission. Kargalgan ridicules the human's arrogance and exhales an absurd amount of mana. For his part, Jinwoo acknowledges that he has never felt such a strong presence in his entire life, and it's a pity that the two are natural opposites. Regardless, the man conjures his army of shadows and assures that he will defeat the enemies. Outside the portal, the association's surveillance team has just arrived, surprising the miners. Wu Jinchul wonders why on earth Jinwoo was working on this collection team and for 2 consecutive days. The head of the miners asks why the Vigilant is there, and he asks where Jinwoo Sung is. Hearing the conversation, one of the miners approaches and says that there's something wrong with that guy because he keeps looking at everyone with a scary look. The chief advises that Jinwoo Sung is inside to help the expedition team carry the items. At that moment, Jinchul imagines that Jinwoo must have made up some excuse to become the expedition's porter. In any case, it's necessary to take a closer look at what this hunter is doing, so the inspector prepares to enter the portal, but before that, the mining chief warns that Cha-ha has just entered. In the midst of this, a strange aura passes through the inspectors via the portal, the same one exhaled by the leader of the superior orcs. Immediately, Jinchul orders his partners to perform the magic test again. Speaking of Cha-ha, she advances through the hostile territory of the monsters and notices that many have been defeated by Sum Ki-hoon's team, something she can't understand how was possible, given the high level of these creatures. However, if the aura that just passed is from the dungeon boss, the hunters are certainly in great danger. Meanwhile, the orc chief underestimates Jinwoo's innocence for facing his army with such small forces, but the human assures that the monster will regret underestimating his troops. With that, he activates the Monarch's Domain, a new ability he learned upon reaching level 70 in the demonic castle. Indeed, the Shadow Soldiers have become even stronger after the battle in that fortress. Amidst this, the other humans look at the team's porter and can't believe that someone of their race is capable of doing what is happening before their eyes. At that moment, Kargalgan orders his subordinates to attack. Iron reacts by destroying dozens of them in seconds, while Agris does the same with even less effort. Similarly, Jin Woo-sung navigates through enemy lines with unstoppable speed, decapitating and slashing the superior orcs as if they were nothing. Looking around, Jinwoo notes that his infantry has managed to reach rank B as they are waging a worthy battle. That is, it takes 5 warrior shadows to take down an orc, but still it's considerable. Regardless, Jinwoo must reduce the number of orcs as quickly as possible. However, Kargalgan intervenes with the Fire Dragon's anthem and destroys several shadows, but Jinwoo conjures them up again and explains that they can be revived as many times as necessary. At that point, the orc chief casts the Anthem of Protection and hurls a massive mana rock at the main enemy. When he dodges, the orc levitates the debris around the hall and destroys other shadows, ensuring he will defeat them until Jinwoo's mana runs out. Following this, he chants the Anthem of Blazing Fire, wreaking havoc on the battlefield and forcing the hunters to flee for their lives. In the face of the opponent's strategy, Jin Woo-sung analyzes that this boss is keen on keeping a distance at all costs. Returning to the surveillance team, an inspector discovers that this rank, a portal, is extremely close to that rank as portal. With this discovery, Jinchul orders them to contact the Master of Hunters, as they need to prepare to support the team inside. In the war, the orc chief asserts that his orcs surpass Jinwoo's shadows in strength and number, and that his mana points are draining away as this conversation unfolds. Laughing at this, the man drinks a potion and announces that the time for true necromancy has arrived. Saying so, he resurrects the orcs that died in the battle and assures that all those still alive will meet the same fate. For the first time, Kargalgan shows apprehension as a strange static reaction takes over his body. He tries to understand why this is happening and why he is there. When he first opened his eyes in this place, a command echoed in his mind, and that command was, "Hunt the humans." The reasons behind it didn't matter, and Kargalgan simply obeyed the command. Once again, he follows that order, but this time he sends his special units into action. In the midst of this war, after learning everything that's going on, Master Choi comments to his assistant that only Sum Ki-hoon's team would have been enough in this dungeon, and that if a dungeon break occurs, it will be a bigger disaster than the Jeju Island incident, but they still have time to fix this. Therefore, he orders the guild's strongest to be gathered and sent to this portal immediately. The assistant reports that she has already sent an emergency call to all rank A and above, and Choi thinks that, depending on the situation, they might have to ask for help from the White Tiger and the Reapers. The woman warns that this will not be good, but that's why the master does not want the problem to reach an even greater level. In the throne room battle, Iron fights one of the orc chief's favorites and decapitates him with his axe, while Igris takes down the second after an exchange of blows and faces the third next. Jinwoo comments to himself that his personal guards seem to be at an advantage, while the orc chief can't believe that this is true. The other hunters regain their courage and prepare to assist until the orc chief casts the Anthem of Agony and Blindness all at once to prevent the intervention of the other humans, causing massive damage to them. Tired of the insolence of the strongest among them, the superior orc finally rises from the throne and casts the Anthem of Sleep and Disability around Jin Woo-sung, but the magic circles are shattered before they can take effect. Through the blessing of the great spell Conjurer Candiaro, Jinwoo is now immune to toxic conditions, curses, and the like. Undeterred, the orc casts the Guardian's Anthem, but Jinwoo brings his spectral mages into the fight, who join to form a massive fireball that turns into a small blue flame focus, piercing the orc's shield and hitting him squarely. At that moment, Chahai arrives at the throne room and sees all the pandemonium. She runs towards the hunters and is relieved to see that the captain, though injured, will be okay. She asks her companions what's happening, but not even the hunters are sure. Enraged at being wounded for the first time in battle, the orc chief casts the anthems of Wrath, Strength, and Giants, increasing his size to a colossal level. However, as he tries to step on the human as if he were an insect, he fails to see Jinwoo easily escape. The man confesses that he is fed up, especially since he doesn't much care for giants. Feeling ridiculed, the orc launches the dragon's fire anthem, but misses the first fire shot. Unsatisfied, he creates dozens of magic circles around the hall that repeat the same technique, launching a fiery inferno that drags practically everyone in its path, whether enemies or allies. Having done this, Kargalgan asks if the human still dares to challenge him, even after what he has seen, but Jinwoo answers yes without a second thought. Taking advantage of his smaller size, he leaps unseen and pierces the giant orc's eye with his dagger. Furious, Kargalgan conjures the fire anthem and greatly elevates his power of destruction, essentially turning the entire battlefield into an erupting volcano. Remaining calm, the man ventures among the endless flames and manages to escape the deadly heat. When he moves far enough away to not be hit by the fire pit, Jinwoo pulls a chain from the wall and ties the enemy's arm with it. When Kargalgan pulls the chain, Jinwoo uses the momentum to fly around the orc and bind him entirely, causing Kargalgan to fall on the spot. Meanwhile, Woo Jinchul arrives and informs Cha-ha that he came to help, but seeing what Jin Woo-sung was capable of, realizes it was unnecessary. Cha-ha reflects that even the surveillance team came after this guy and that certainly he not only has the power of an elite hunter, but also masters summoning magic. By the way, she asks if Jinchul knows the young man, and he responds that they are acquaintances, but only just. Meanwhile, Jinwoo approaches Kargalgan, who has returned to his original size, and remarks that conjurers lose when their protection is broken. Determined to go down fighting, the orc shouts that his body cannot be destroyed and fiercely battles against Jinwoo's summons, but ultimately he is brought down and dealt a fatal blow by iron. After defeating the dungeon boss, Jinwoo gains 2 levels. Collecting all the items would be a bit much, but he doubts anyone would mind if he extracts Kargalgan's shadow. Upon doing so and mastering the monster's essence, it's time to choose a name for it. Jinwoo can't remember the beast's name as it's quite hard to pronounce, so he decides to call it Tusk due to its tusks. The system shows that this orc is of elite knight rank, something the protagonist had never seen before. In addition to Tusk, the other superior orcs will also be of great help, and Jinwoo stores them all with a smile on his face. At that moment, Jinchul approaches Jinwoo, whose presence the director had not even noticed, and realizes that everyone there saw what he did. The group members ask how on earth a porter managed to do all that, but Jinchul protects the boy by declaring the matter secret and asking everyone present to keep what they saw today confidential. Anyway, before the wardens accompany Jinwoo out, Hoon thanks him for all the help he provided, and all the team members join together to bow before the hero of the day. In turn, Jinwoo returns the will of the group member who thought she was going to die. After he leaves, Cha-ha worries whether the man thought she was odd for holding a pickaxe. The next day, at the association's headquarters, Master Choi tries to understand what happened, especially concerning the mysterious Jin Woo-sung. By the way, he wants to know from Ki-hoon who he thinks is stronger, Choi or Jinwoo. The captain asks back, considering that any expedition is done in groups, does Choi feel capable of conquering an A-rank dungeon alone? Honestly, Choi admits that would be impossible, which is embarrassing. In any case, the fact is that the association means Jin Woo-sung, and this has become clearer than ever after this incident. Meanwhile, Jinwoo meets with Jinhoo and asks if the friend has made up with his father after the fuss about being the master of the family guild, but this matter is much more delicate than it seemed. Outside the Hunters Association, the entire media was searching for Lee Min-sung, the man who has everything. Watching the intense media activity from within a car, Min-sung confesses that he enjoys this kind of attention. Then the car arrives, dropping off Baek Yoon-ho from the White Tiger Guild and Choi Jong-in from the Hunters Guild, causing the entire media to rush towards them to ask if they came to recruit Lee Min-sung. However, Baek has no idea who that person is. Choi responds that Min-sung has already signed with the Reapers Guild, so they were there to discuss other matters, which drives the press away as they were only interested in a story about that man. Left in peace, Baek mentions to Choi about the A-rank portal issue that almost escalated to S-rank, but the association's master doesn't think it was as serious as the red portal incident that cost a Tiger White A-ranker's life. Regardless, Jinwoo's involvement in these incidents has shaken up the guild structures, and the truth is both guild masters are now seeking an S-rank hunter, intensifying a rivalry between their two organizations as both are after this mysterious youth. Suddenly, a man with the Reapers Guild emblem approaches and asks if they are there to steal Min-sung from them, but the S-ranks angrily reply they couldn't care less about that guy. Away from them, Jinwoo has just arrived for his re-evaluation, but he doesn't understand what's happening around him. In the classroom of Han Song-yai and Janice Sung, the protagonist's sister, the girls in the class are all watching Min-sung's press conference on their phones, known for being a playboy and womanizer actor who used and betrayed several co-stars. Speaking of which, there's Lee Min-sung, brimming with confidence, declaring in the interview that he has awakened as a hunter, and his rank will be assessed today. Although he struggled against this role at one point, the young man feels ready to embrace the destiny he was born for. Moreover, he will fight for Lord Lim Ta-ju, master of the Reapers Guild. Extremely agitated, the press asks if it isn't rash for Min-sung to abandon his acting career, yet inside, the man knows well that he has already secured his A rank with a 2-year contract with the Reapers. In other words, he'll take on a mission or two during this time, then people will forget the scandals he was involved in, and afterwards he solidifies as an A-rank hunter in action. Suddenly, Jinwoo arrives at the roadside leading to the building, but a security guard pushes the hunter away because of the press conference. Jinwoo replies that he has an appointment with the association, but still, the security stops him from passing. Min-sung wonders who this jerk is that wants to get through, until President Go arrives and undermines the security's authority, stating it's not up to him whether the boy can enter or not as he is his guest. Moreover, Go made it clear he didn't want any conference at that time. Having his moment completely cut off, Min-sung announces to the media that he will quickly check what's going on with the association, but Jin-chul prevents the young actor from entering, stating that someone else is being re-evaluated at the moment and Min-sung must wait. Min-sung whispers to the inspector that one call from him could ruin the guy's career, but not caring at all, Jin-chul responds that he does not appreciate Min-sung's lack of consideration one bit. Meanwhile, inside the building, the president tells Jinwoo that Choi and Baek came to await the result of the boys' re-evaluation in person, as they had been without an S rank for 2 years, therefore everyone is interested. Finally, Jinwoo is taken to the room where the re-evaluation will be conducted, but before that, the person in charge needs to confirm the nature of the young man's abilities as a hunter. That said, the evaluator asks what kind of powers Jinwoo has, and he replies that he can summon certain things. Surprised by this, President Go reveals that director Woo Jin-chul has made a detailed report of Jinwoo's abilities, so it's crucial that he hides nothing. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Jinwoo decides not to dodge and reveals hundreds of spectral shadow soldiers behind him. At that moment, both Choi and Baek reflect that this incredible power would obliterate them. After the re-evaluation process, Jinwoo waits until he receives the result, then gains a new identity as an S-rank hunter in the mage category. In the young man's mind, this is perfect, because now he can sell the Orb of Greed without looking suspicious. Then he can purchase equipment good enough to conquer the demonic castle. In the end, President Go confesses that he is eager to see what Jinwoo Sung will do with this S-rank strength. When Jinwoo leaves the room, he is greeted by Choi and Baek, who also congratulate him on the result and ask to have a word with the new elite hunter, but Jinwoo passes them, saying he needs to resolve other matters at the moment. However, as much as the two tried to warn him, he ends up opening the exit door without knowing what was coming. At that moment, Han-sung tells Gina that her brother is on the live broadcast as she was watching the live transmission from the association's headquarters. Similarly, various characters learn from the TV that the protagonist has just become the 10th S-rank hunter in history, a news significant enough to cause a national stir, as it had been 2 years since anyone of that level had emerged, since the last was Chaha. In the following scene, we see that Jinwoo informs his father that he could not bring Jinwoo to the family guild. According to the S-rank hunter, there was something he needed to resolve alone before anything else, and for that, he has to keep fighting and evolving until he has the necessary strength for it. Therefore, joining any organization would interfere. Because of this, Jinwoo actually asked Jinwoo to join him. The father says that the son would be quite selfish if he accepted the invitation and recalls that he was willing to let Jin-sung run this project, but even after everything that was planned, Jinwoo brought another proposal and without having achieved anything, intends to abandon the responsibility and work elsewhere, which must be a joke. Hearing every word, Jinwoo remembers moments with his foster brother and apologizes to his father, but states categorically that he will indeed work with Jinwoo Sung. In that case, the father warns that the son must be prepared for the consequences. Returning to the media frenzy at the association's headquarters, Baek approaches Jinwoo and advises him not to exert himself too much in responding to the crowd and offers him a ride home. However, as soon as the leader of the White Tiger finishes speaking, Jinwoo makes an incredibly swift move, dodges the entire press by circling around them, and pulls his hood over his head to leave freely from the throng. At this, Choi remarks that despite being a mage type, the kid still possesses significant physical capabilities, while Bak can't believe he couldn't even keep up with that guy's speed. Back with Jinwoo, he begins preparing for the next challenge at the hunter's auction, searching for artifacts to protect him from flames as he is heading into a very hot dungeon. The seller then shows him a cloak that can be worn over clothes along with an easy-to-equip ring. Seeing the price, Jinwoo is shocked and asks if there's any discount, but the employee regrets that the value of these items cannot be reduced. However, if the customer can break a specific glass in the store, he can take the items inside for free. This glass is magically enhanced to withstand scratches from even A-rank hunters. Jinwoo approaches the glass and feels a flow of magical power, but it's nothing serious, so he concentrates a certain amount of mana in his right fist. Immediately, the seller says it was just a joke, since any vibration triggers the security, even if the glass isn't broken. Embarrassed, Jinwoo says he was also looking for daggers, so another employee steps forward, being responsible for these products in the store. Returning to the initial employee, he notices that Jinwoo left a crack in the glass, even though he hadn't touched it. Then, Jinwoo shows interest in a dagger of the level of Kasaka's venomous fang and asks for the price, but finds it too expensive for this weapon. So he uses one of his daggers to try selling it in the store. Evaluating the item, the employee is willing to pay 100 million for it, which impresses Jinwoo, considering this knife cost him less than 3 million gold. Anyway, since the Mega Assassin, rank B, is priced this way, perhaps he won't need to sell the Orb of Greed. Either way, the young man asks to use the store's restroom. At night, Baek reflects alone in his office that he knew Jinwoo's son was strong, but this was beyond expectation. The magical power he felt in the evaluation lab, aside from the boy's physical ability, shows that his reawakening must be complete. However, since Jinwoo has become even stronger over time, Baek imagines he might not have reawakened. In fact, Jinwoo may be capable of growing stronger over time. The next day, Jin is relieved to see that the press that was at her house's door is gone because now she can go to school in peace. By the way, she complains that her brother should warn her next time he's going to appear on TV, but even he had no idea that would happen. Anyway, he tells her he's leaving tomorrow and will be out for about a week. In the midst of this, Jinwoo arrives all excited for the adventure and introduces himself to Gina as her brother's loyal squire. Then, Jinwoo takes the opportunity to explain that he will be busy all week with this guy because of works, so he squeezes Jinwoo's shoulder to make him agree with the narrative being set, and Jinwoo tells the exact same thing to the guy's sister. At night, when the other two were sleeping, Jinwoo takes the opportunity to summon Tusk and his elite subordinates, but is surprised to think he had 4 bodyguards, whereas there were only 3 there. Hearing this, one of the orcs points upward, and Jinwoo understands that since the 4th got stuck in the ceiling, it was not possible to extract his shadow. Nevertheless, the 3 that remain are strong enough, so the human puts one of them in charge and orders that Jinna be protected. Then Jinwoo leaves home to summon some shadow soldiers to start patrolling to make the city a bit safer. Speaking of which, in the middle of the night, a winged creature crosses the sky. When dawn breaks, the protagonist joins Jinwoo for a ride and explains to his friend that this job at the DS tower that was mentioned, in which he will be out of the house for a week, is like training. Jinwoo asks if the guy intends to get even stronger, being that he's already an S rank, and he responds without hesitation that's exactly it. Upon reaching the location that gives access to the demonic castle, the protagonist descends into the depths of this dungeon with his new ring enchanted with water and his cloak with wind, recently purchased to combat the fierce fire of this dungeon. One way or another, it's time to conquer this place. At this, Jinwoo notices that a message has arrived for him. His mission is to defeat Baron, the demonic monarch, who resides on the highest floor of this labyrinth. The reward is a soul swap runestone, which clearly seems to be a class ability. With a prize like this, Jinwoo feels even more motivated, so he resumes the quest from where he left off on floor 75. Meanwhile, Jinwoo's mother comments that she never imagined he would leave home on his own, and wants to know if her husband doesn't miss him. But the father responds that it's just a troublesome child leaving the nest, nothing more. However, as the man spoke, he feels a strange reaction in his body and completely loses consciousness until he faints. Back at the demonic castle, a colossal creature crosses one of the upper floors. To test his new toy, Jinwoo summons Tusk to spring into action. Without delay, with overwhelming power, the leader of the High Orcs strikes the enemy head-on and exterminates it without ceremony. Impressed by this, Jinwoo knows he needs to think carefully before using that move, so he decides to leave the Orb of Greed with Tusk for now. Hours later, Jinwoo's father wakes up in a hospital bed and learns from his wife that their son visited him while he was unconscious. Just then, the doctor arrives to explain that the businessman has contracted the eternal sleep disease, which begins with sudden bouts of drowsiness and ultimately leads to a persistent coma. According to the doctor, people who contract this disease have low resistance to mana, which occurs when they are exposed to this magical energy for extended periods. With that, the doctor asks if the patient often interacts with hunters in his daily life, to which he replies that his son works in that field. In the middle of the city, just before nightfall, 2 hunters are patrolling peacefully by the sea when they spot a strange winged insect staring directly at them. Turning back to Jinwoo, he creates 6 shadow squads to increase efficiency and gives them 2 orders. Each team must eliminate any enemy they encounter, and if they find an entry permit, they must notify their master. Naturally, some items might be left behind in the process, but this will allow them to advance much faster. At least that was Jinwoo's plan, but it has been 2 days since he arrived on the 80th floor, and the pace of the teams has significantly slowed. Seeing his MP drop, he knows his shadows are being destroyed. To see what's happening, he goes to Squad B, which has been wiped out. In Jinwoo's mind, this is quite strange since Tusk's squad was right next to Squad A, meaning Squad B, which was farther away, was defeated subsequently, which doesn't make sense. Perhaps the enemies avoided Tusk, the orc leader, to target a weaker troop. If they are selecting their targets based on the level of threat, the next targets will be the bears. Speaking of which, the bears indeed encounter the 4 demons that cause all this devastation. Demonstrating unparalleled skill, these demons advance and wreak havoc on the enemy lines once again. Watching the battle, Jinwoo now understands why his soldiers were defeated. At that moment, one of the superior demons attacks the human, who dodges each vile strike and responds with a kick that sends his adversary flying an absurd distance. Following that, two other demons attack and Jinwoo easily kills both with his dagger. After this, as he approaches the last opponent, Jinwoo finds the answer to a question he has always had: do magical monsters feel fear? As he approaches the target, he realizes that indeed they do. Hey guys, the source will be in the comments. Make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the upcoming videos. See you.